It is 7:15, and I will call this meeting of the Board of Directors to order. Good evening. I am Eric Greenberg, Chair of the FY24 CA Board of Directors. Please remember that tonight's meeting is being live streamed. You can find the agendas and background materials for this evening on the CA Board of Directors webpage. Links to these documents can also be found in the description section of our YouTube live stream for those watching the meeting there. If you are virtual, please mute your microphones unless speaking. If you are in the room, please ensure that all cell phones are silenced. Raise your hand to speak, and I will record the names in the order which I see them. If you are virtual, please use the chat feature. As we move through the meeting, I will introduce each item on the agenda. Before a vote is taken, I will restate a motion as well as who motioned it and seconded. If at any point you have trouble hearing me or any other member present, please say so. Tonight's timekeeper is Sky Anderson. I will now call the roll. Sky.
Here.
Dietrich. Reg.
Here.
Karen.
Here.
Chris.
Here.
Alan.
Here.
Dennis.
Here.
Keith.
Here.
Bill. Andy.
Here.
And I am here. 2, announcement of closed special meetings held or to be held. The CA Ethics Panel held a closed meeting on December 20th at 9:30 a.m. in Baltimore, Maryland. Panel members present were Lydia Lawless, Chad Spencer, and Danielle Renian. The vote to close the meeting was 3-0-0. All members voted for it. The panel meeting was closed under Maryland Homeowners Association Act, Maryland Code, Real Property, Section 11B, 111, 41, and 3, discussion of matters pertaining to employees and personnel, consultation with legal counsel on legal matters. The CA's Board of Directors held a closed meeting at CA headquarters on January 18, 2024 at 7:08. Members present were Chair Greenberg, Sky, Dietrich, Reg, Karen, Chris, Ellen, Dennis, Keith, and Bill Santos. The vote to close the meeting was 9-0-0. No directors voted against closing the meeting or abstained. The closed meeting was authorized under Maryland Homeowners Association Act, Maryland Code, Real Property, Section 11B, 111, 41, discussion of matters pertaining to employees and personnel, consultation with legal counsel on legal matters, consultation with staff, personnel, consultants, attorneys, board members, or other persons in connection with pending or potential litigation or other legal matters, and consideration of the terms and conditions of a business transaction in the negotiation stage if the disclosure could adversely affect the economic interests of the Homeowners Association. May I have a motion to approve the agenda?
I move we approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
Are there any objections to the agenda? I'll go Karen first.
Yeah, I move that we add the discussion of retention bonuses and committee charters to the agenda.
So I got a motion by Karen to add retention bonuses.
Could we take those one at a time?
One at a time?
The compound motion.
Is it compound motion?
Two topics you wanted to add.
What are the,
I asked to add two topics in one motion.
what are the two topics again?
Retention bonuses and committee charters.
Okay, we'll do them one at a time if that's okay.
Yeah, that's,
Okay, I got a motion to add retention bonuses by Karen to the agenda. Is there a second?
Second.
A second by Alan. Is there any discussion on the motion to add retention bonuses to the agenda? Alan?
I seconded it so we would have it. I don't have any desire to change what's going on, but I think there's been some talk in the community, so having it sort of public out there shouldn't take long. We can put it to bed.
Okay. Is there any other discussion on the motion? Seeing no discussion, are there any objections to the motion?
Yeah, I object.
Okay, in that case, I will call the roll for a roll call vote. So we got a motion by Karen to add retention bonuses to the agenda. That was seconded by Alan. Chris?
Yes.
Alan?
Yes.
Sky?
No.
Keith?
Yes.
Reg?
Yes.
Karen?
yes.
Andy?
No.
And I vote yes. The motion passes 6-2. I will put that under 8C. So that'll come right after the budgets.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I'm going to put that under, actually, no, it's got to go under 7. That's for discussion, right? The motion was to discuss the bonuses. So that will come under 8C. Is there any other discussion on the agenda?
You were going to take two parts.
Yeah.
Do you
Sky?
need to do my other motion for the committee
sure.
charters? So I also move that we add committee charters to the board discussion.
Okay.
I second it.
We've got a motion to add committee charters to the agenda. and it's moved by Karen, seconded by Sky. Is there any discussion on the motion? Are there any objections to the motion?
Yeah, I'll object.
Okay, I will call the roll. Chris?
Yes.
Alan?
Yes.
Sky?
Yes.
Keith?
Yes.
Reg?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Alan? Andy?
No.
I vote yes, the motion passes 7-1. I will add that to the agenda under 8D. Is there any other discussion on the agenda? Sky?
Yeah, I think at the last meeting, we talked for a few minutes about work sessions and meetings changing over to new business and old business. Was that finalized, or is that, we still have to meet the 3-meeting policy?
So I believe we're still waiting for,
So if I can say, Bill asked if we could push that back,
Okay.
so we did.
Oh, okay.
so yeah, that's.
He was going to write something up, I
Yeah,
thought.
he's going to write something up.
He got
I thought it was
sick.
to take.
That's right.
I thought it was to take effect next fiscal year anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah, there's plenty of time.
there's plenty of time.
Yeah, I just didn't want it to disappear since it wasn't on the agenda tonight. And I also have a question. What is the difference between item 4, Columbia update, and item 9A, President's report?
I'll let you answer that.
So item 4 is more about what's happening in the community that you guys can see visually. And item 9 is actually more detailed information that's more written than, in reality, I'm not sure everyone reads my president's report as thoroughly as they look at the videos.
We look at pictures better.
No, I do too. So yes,
Okay, thank you.
There's pictures.
not enough.
Is there any other discussion on the agenda?
I think it's worthwhile to say also, the reason why that's up there, we discussed that at a prior meeting, is because our meetings have a tendency to go downhill really fast. So by starting with some positive and looking at the good things that are going on in CA, we get a little bit of perspective going into the meeting.
Got a comment?
Okay, Reg?
Yes, I actually really watch those videos. Be a voyeur or whatever, but I enjoy watching it. It's a lot of fun. There's a lot of information to get out there. I enjoy it.
And I'd also like to thank IT for working extra hard to make sure that today's videos got on there. So thank you. Is there any other discussion on the agenda? Seeing no discussion, are there any objections to the agenda?
Modified agenda.
To the modified agenda? Seeing no objections, the modified agenda passes with unanimous consent. That brings us to Columbia update.
So why don't you go ahead and run the first one, and we're kind of tight for time, and then I'll speak to them afterwards instead of before. Yeah.
Bailey's bundles?
Perfect.
I believe that veterans are the heroes that are often unheard in communities. Putting together these care packages meant a lot to us students to give back to the people who have served and are serving currently.
Bailey's Bundles is a program run out of the American Legion Post 156. And what we do is send care packages to service members deployed overseas to bring them joy and to help them feel connected and appreciated back from us back home. It's magical to see everybody coming together to support Millie's vision of everybody doing a little and having it have a big impact.
Having the Columbia Association collaborate with us actually meant a lot because their values are really about trust and about building community. Having them back us up today and dedicate so many of their efforts to these care packages, it was really speaking volumes to me.
CA's partnership means that we can help and touch more people. We can create more magic on the other side of the world and spread the love further. She loved being able to reach through to the generations and show them what they can do in a small way to make that difference and to build bridges and to create fabric of community.
knowing that they will see these little packages of love all around the world, that makes me feel really happy.
So I think you all know that we work closely with the Howard County Veterans Association or Foundation, and in the past, we've done a card tent where people could write cards, then send them to veterans overseas. This year, we took that to the next level, and we did the food drive with the students. And this is who we are, and you guys don't see it every day, but we are an incredible organization. This is one little piece.
Is this on the website?
Not yet, but it will be.
And how does one get, if one just went to the CA website?
So if you look at the blog, most of the videos that are in here end up on the blog post.
How do you get to the blog?
I'll send you the link, but it's on the CA website.
But I mean, is it relatively straightforward? Is it buried? I'm asking because I think there are people, I looked at that with Millie and thinking of like somebody like Liz Bobo, who was a good friend of Millie's and would really probably like to see that video. Would she be able to get in there and know where to go? Or
So I would say I found it. But I'll take a look and see if we can't make it easier.
Great, thank you.
I think I saw it on Facebook.
Yeah, it's on Facebook too. You're up.
Not everybody's on Facebook. Some of us can't be. But anyway, I was going to ask if you could send me the link. I'd like to share it with
Absolutely.
the commission group I'm on. Thank you.
Brine application.
Perfect.
Columbia Association has looked at ways to become more sustainable and more financially responsible. We started the Brine program because we wanted to look at innovative and sustainable ways we can achieve our goal, which is safety. What the brine does is it prevents moisture, ice, snow, water, anything from adhering to whatever surface when it comes to the roadway, sidewalks, pathways with frozen precipitation. When preparing for snow events, CA staff looks several days, weeks into the forecast leading up into the event. Generally 24 to 36 hours before the event starts is when we do apply the brine solution. So you will see CA vehicles and carts. They are not applying pesticides, they are applying brine to our sidewalks, pathways, boardwalks, parking lots, facilities, sidewalks. So you will see us out and about when the sun is shining to apply this brine product. With using brine, CA is using probably less than 50% of chemicals and salt introduced into our environment than we did in previous years. We keep it onto the surface that it's actually applied to, and it doesn't bounce and spread and go into our waterways, into our streams, into our lakes, our ponds. It's good for all of our nature, for our four-legged friends. It doesn't get stuck to poles. It doesn't burn the poles. Overall, just a safer, better product that's much more cost-effective and more controllable.
So I think it's important to note that improvements throughout the open space don't just happen organically. They're intentional, and that we're looking at every little thing that we do. And it's, all these things happen, and you say, well, that just makes sense. But, somebody has to intentionally look at it. And that's what we're doing every day.
Question. Mm-hmm. It's clear that from an environmental and all the other factors that was positive. Do these kinds of products have safety testing so that we're not, I just came from a risk management committee meeting, so it's on my mind. Could somebody come at us who slipped on our sidewalk and say, you applied an inferior product, I slipped, it's not?
No, this is better than what we do without it. And it's not widespread use, but it's widely used.
Great, thank you.
Festive Fridays.
This is Festive Friday. We are so proud to co-host this event with Downtown Columbia Partnership and really provide this opportunity for the community to connect in so many different ways.
I love bringing people down to the heart of the lakefront. I love the work that CA's Open Space puts in decorating these trees, and it's great to have the community down here. It's just the place to be in Columbia.
It really is a special place at a special time of year. It really is a shared vision here at the lakefront and throughout downtown Columbia to make sure that this is a place and a space where people feel warmth around being together, everyone having a great time, everyone feeling the joy and the spirit of this time of year.
I think the shared vision between both the partnership and between Columbia Association is just highlighting Columbia, celebrating Columbia. Festive Friday is truly the event where we work together, and it's just awesome to work with that team. They're a wonderful resource for our community. It's great to just have people out and mingling in this space and feeling like it's their home.
We hope that they feel like they have made a memory and they can take that home with them, and they continue really feeling proud of being from Columbia.
I don't know who else made it down there, but I did, and I said to myself, damn, this is remarkable. This is who we are. This is who we want to be. And we should feel really proud about that.
Text as art.
Here today, we're at the Columbia Arts Center to celebrate and honor students who have work that were selected for the Texas Art Show. We're looking at how students are using text as a design element in the fabrication and the making of an art piece. I think it's our goal or job to teach students dispositions that are beneficial for them outside of the school system, right? So like anything that we are providing them through our curriculum should be providing them with ways to engage, communicate, persevere. I think at the root of everything, those are things that are most important. UCA wants us in here and sees the value in having our students come into these spaces and interact. And we see the great value in just being able to honor what the students are doing in the classrooms and provide them a professional and elevated space to be honored in. It's about bringing community together, bringing students from different schools together to see how the challenge has been posed differently. To build relationships in the community is the starting point for other great things. And allow students and teachers to make connections that then can build other bridges later on.
Again, these programs happen intentionally. It speaks to who we are as an organization and how we reach into the community and some of the great things that happen that we're all part of.
And that's really why I want them to be so much easier to get to. I haven't made the comparison recently, but I remember looking at our website compared to, let's say, Reston Association's website, and theirs was much more community-focused. Ours was much more sports and fitness and that end of what we do. And so this is, I want these to be centered.
Is this what John McCoy's next?
Yes.
Okay, before we run this one, I would like to take a second to say that if you don't know already, John McCoy is going to retire. And John McCoy is, had spent time with the Maryland National Department of the Environment. He has multiple degrees in biology and agronomy. And John McCoy is not someone who just talks and sits behind a desk and writes words. He reaches into the community. He's out on weekends. He's out on evenings. He's out making a difference. And what he's done is remarkable. The programs that he started are going to carry on for a long time. And I couldn't be sorrier that he's leaving before May 1. to say thank you to John McCoy for all his hard work and all he's done for this community. And also say there are hundreds of people working every day at CA to make things like this happen. And we do great things. There are things we could improve on. We have discussions, but we are remarkable. What we do for Columbia, Columbia is a much awarded city, and I feel like the Columbia Association is at the center of all that.
So was he doing sound testing in?
Yes, he was for cicadas, and that they had a banana bread cicada cake that they made.
I thought he was
and
eating
he said it
bozo.
tasted a little bit like chicken.
Cool.
Reg has a question.
Oh, Reg?
Two things. One is, are we doing anything for him as CA? Are we doing anything to celebrate him? And I understand he might be coming back a little bit.
We're trying to get him to come back on a part-time basis until we find somebody to take his place.
Mm-hmm.
And we are tomorrow at the Ale House from 3 to 5. I'm not sure if it should go public, but we are going to have something for him.
Okay.
Any other questions on the Columbia update? Thank you for the presentation. Next, we will move on to resident speak out. Speakers will be asked to speak in the order in which they signed up. Individuals are allowed 3 minutes for comment. Anyone representing an organization has 5 minutes. Following remarks, the board will have a chance to ask questions. Please mute your microphones when you're not speaking. We ask that speakers adhere to the 3 or 5 minute time limit when presenting their testimony, and for board members to limit their questions in order to stay within the allotted time period. Our first speaker is Bob Dover.
Hi, folks.
Good evening.
CA's watershed management plan was written by well-qualified environmental professionals. Page 89 of that plan specifically recommends against stream restoration projects like Longfellow and Elkhorn Branch. There was a solid scientific basis for that recommendation, and the scientific literature since CA approved that plan has only reinforced that basis. Despite this recommendation by the experts, CA proceeded to do the Longfellow project anyway. We now know from the recent stream erosion and the need to replant hundreds of trees that the recommendation was sound advice. However, the staff and WAC are still pushing to do even larger and more destructive projects like Elkhorn. The activities of the WAC have been strongly criticized by both adjacent homeowners and by resident experts with professional qualifications in hydrology and engineering. The WAC is mostly populated by individuals who hold 40-hour certifications in gardening and landscaping, but who lack the qualifications necessary to advise anyone on the merits of a 130-acre environmental engineering project. The WAC members have admitted that they made no attempt to conduct an independent technical review of the Elkhorn documents, and they've refused to meet with concerned residents to discuss the project. In response to that criticism, the WAC is now proposing to further insulate themselves from any outside technical input. They propose to further restrict residents' access to technical information about projects that impact our properties. And in response to the disclosure that they failed to follow their own rules, they simply chose to change those rules. This is on top of the recent attempt by some of this board to restrict the ability of residents to speak out on topics that affect our properties. An organization that wishes for its projects to be based on scientific facts and that wishes to avoid impacts to adjacent properties has no need to circle the wagons like this. It doesn't need to insulate itself from the opinions of outside experts, and it doesn't need to hide project information from affected homeowners by requiring its advisors to sign a non-disclosure agreement. These continuing efforts to shut out opposing opinions and withhold information from the residents are not the actions of an organization that wishes to be acceptable, transparent, and accountable. CA is accountable to its residents, and if its advisors don't wish to have their activities scrutinized by the residents, then maybe they should step aside. Thanks.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Thank you for your testimony. Oh, wait, Alan.
Just so I'm clear, I clearly didn't read it as fully as I might. Did this non-disclosure agreement you're talking about, is that in the new WAC charter?
It is.
Thank you.
Next, we have Amy Bennett.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Amy Bennett, and I've lived in Columbia since its inception. I am here tonight as a follow-up to my testimony at the last meeting regarding changes to the WAC charter. Last meeting, I spoke about several reasoned concerns about changes to that charter. In summary of my testimony last time, I focused on several reasoned concerns. The first had to do with not adhering to the process for changing charters, which requires a 2/3 vote from the sitting committee and then a return to the board for approval. To the best of my knowledge, this did not happen. The second change of concern is that under the new charter, a person nominated by a local board must now be voted on by the committee. So, for example, if Long Reach recommends someone for the WAC and the WAC committee decides they don't want the person, they say no. This change allows the WAC to override the will of the village board who represents the residents. Third, the villages were not given a chance to weigh in on the changes in the charter. Thankfully, our village representative and residents raised the issue with our board, and they have voted to send a letter to all of you expressing concerns about the change in policy. I'm not sure exactly when you'll be receiving that letter, but it was a vote. Reg, I'm sure, can speak to it. Fourth, it was stated by CA staff that by moving the committee away from the board, it was supposed to advise the board, residents will no longer be able to request under the committee anything through HOA. Finding a way around the HOA is not in the spirit of Columbia or the concepts of inclusion and equity. All of this, in my mind, suggests that CA is once again trying to withhold information that residents are entitled to see and doing whatever they can to not listen to the voices of people who sometimes disagree with your position. Columbia is my home. I choose to live here. I had the benefit that those young people had. I want that to continue, but you're not perfect, and you need to listen to dissenting opinions. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Sky?
Yeah, I didn't catch your fourth point. I didn't understand that.
Yeah, Sky, in a previous meeting, we were told by a CA staff member that residents, once this charter is approved, which it already is, we as residents can't request under the HOA Act, which we've been doing, information. The HOA Act was designed, ask your council, the HOA Act was designed for resident input. I hope that answers your question. And if it doesn't, CA can answer.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you. Next, we have Sharon Boyes, representing Protect Our Streams.
Hello.
Good evening.
Good evening. Thank you for this opportunity, and thank you to this dedicated group of volunteer neighbors for your time and for your commitment to our community. Do you remember the song, If I Had $1 Million by the Bare Naked Ladies? What if you had an extra $1 million? What if it's true that CA has an extra $5 million? Do you or don't you? It's troubling that there seems to be some question on this, but going under the assumption it's true, that's a lot of money. That's a lot of the residents' money. It's certainly enough to invest in dredging equipment for our ponds and lakes to keep the dredging costs down in the future, or you could just put the money into a dedicated dredging fund. It's enough to hire an independent expert to see what can be done to mitigate the failed stream restoration in Longfellow. It's enough to try a very small Green Streets BMP, such as a bioswale along Hesperus Drive. It's enough to hire an out-of-state, independent, true watershed expert to come and evaluate the thing that survey after survey is the thing that residents care about the most, our wooded stream corridors. They could work with all of the stakeholders, including the residents, to come up with a desperately needed new approach to how we treat our environment around here. We must not ever repeat the mistakes that were made in my neighborhood. We might get a new watershed manager, but the 100-foot wide scar through the former mature forest will be there for many lifetimes to come, maybe forever. $5 million is enough to fund a rain garden program. It's enough to fund the pool so they can stay open all summer. It's enough that CA could consider giving it back if they're not interested in funding what the community cares about. But the last thing CA should be considering at this time of distrust among the community, retirements, an upcoming election, and uncertainty about our next president is splitting millions of dollars up into bonuses among themselves. Moving on to the WAC committee. It's hard to know where to begin, since they just basically rubber stamped everything they were asked to by a leader who is leaving, who also canceled the last meeting because the WAC hadn't reviewed their new charter, which you can only assume means it was written, at least in part, by the person who is now leaving. Is there even a point now to having this committee? It's my understanding if a committee is under the board, it is subject to the HOA Act. But if it's under the staff, they are not. So does this mean that the committee can act in secret from the board and residents? Why on earth would a WAC member need to sign an NDA for basically what adds up to a rubber stamp and rain garden committee? Folks aren't just upset about the WAC. I hear it's the Aging Well and Arts Committee too. You're a homeowners association. Why the secrecy and paranoia and fear? This is the kind of stuff that only feeds into the distrust among the community that they already have of CA. Can't you see that? You need to follow the processes and procedures in place. The disaster in Longfellow was in violation of the now very outdated watershed management plan. I don't know if there's any value to the WAC committee. I don't know if anything good comes out of it or not. But what we need for the immediate time being is an immediate halt to any project in the pipeline that was approved by the old watershed manager. We need a forward-thinking watershed management plan that takes the projected rainfall totals, climate change, science, protecting the environment, and projects that truly mitigate the impacts of upland stormwater runoff into account, and we need to ban destructive stream restorations in our open space. If something must be done due to a true emergency, you need to hire a true outside independent watershed expert as needed until we have a new plan in place. You paid for a climate vulnerability study that showed we were in good shape. Our steep stream banks were keeping us safe from flooding. No kidding. Why would you ignore the words and advice of people who want to keep us safe? Why does CA continue to push the Longfellow project as a success? Who is going to be liable for flooded basements in Longfellow? I took a walk in the freezing cold and snow the other night and quickly smelled the stench coming off the stream. It's been nearly 3 years since the project was completed. I fear the stench will linger forever. Our forests and lakes and ponds and streams have been through a lot. Our wildlife deserves a break. Our open space and stream corridors need to take a deep breath for a while. We need to stop taking and give back for a change. We need to stop stealing from the next generation. Thank you to the thoughtful board members who stood up for the community and the environment on Lake Elkhorn, and thank you for your time tonight and your consideration of our requests.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Scott?
Thank you.
Sky's got a question.
Yeah, you said that the WAC charter was written by somebody who was leaving?
Yes, I would assume that John McCoy helped write that WAC charter.
Oh, okay. You assumed that. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Maybe you could ask that. Maybe someone in this room knows. Does anybody know who did write the WAC charter? Can anybody answer that?
I don't think this is a two-way conversation.
Yeah.
Well, maybe you can find out from our president.
We can figure that out. Any other questions?
Right.
Thank
you so much.
That concludes resident speak out for this evening. To limit interruptions during board discussion, all members of the general public will now be returned to the audience. This means you'll no longer be able to show your camera or unmute your audio, and please put all cell phones in.
Sorry, that's me.
In airplane mode. while I'm talking about muting cell phones and cameras. but you're more than welcome to stay on as an attendee to watch the remainder of the work session. You can also watch a live stream on the CA live stream YouTube page. Thank you so much for your participation tonight.
Is this a work session or a meeting?
Not a work session.
Whoops.
Work session.
Meeting. For the remainder of the meeting. Sorry about that. You can also watch a live stream on the CA live stream YouTube page. Thank you so much for your participation tonight. I will now take a moment to allow staff to make this transition. And given that, can I get a show of hands who on the board would like a 5-minute recess? Or should we just push through?
I'm good if we push through.
Everybody good?
Push through.
Okay, we'll push through. I'll give about 10 seconds. Okay from IT.
Sure. I can just mute the microphone, but not rearrange furniture.
Okay, so I'm all set? Okay, cool. That brings us to item 6 on the agenda, the consent agenda. The meetings for the December 14th, 2023 Board of Directors meeting are approved by consent. The first item on the agenda is under board votes, the IRS Form 990. So I assume you'll present, or Susan will present?
I think it's some questions. So staff put it together and we agree with it as written. And, staff has to sign it by the IRS or the Fed requires someone, an officer of the company to sign it. And we would only sign it if we thought it was truthful.
So do you have any questions regarding the 990 form? So I do have one question, and this is a question under 15. And basically, line 15 talks about the basically how we're compensating both the CEO and under 15B, our compensation policy for key employees and officers. And when I look at the response under Schedule O, it basically talks about a
Which part? You said
Yeah, tell us where you are here.
What page?
it's part 6.
Okay, part 6.
Part 6, page, I don't have the numbers here.
Section B.
Part 6, Section B, page 6. But there's, at the very end, basically, we're required, or as part of the 990, to provide comments when we check the yes box for line 15. And the comment refers to periodic, and the comment, I'll quote, says, periodically CA has a compensation study for all team members to ensure salaries are consistent with market conditions. So the one thing I'd like to point out is the last time that we did such a compensation study for CA was in 2014. So that's 10 years ago. So the question I have, and maybe this is probably best directed to our general counsel, is, does it make sense to still check yes for box 15B and have the statement about a compensation study when our most recent compensation study is 10 years old? And we obviously can't be using 10-year-old data for determining compensation.
Yeah, my understanding was the questions that you posed, there was answers provided to those, which my recollection, I don't have it in front of me, was that although there wasn't a formal compensation study, that the financial folks use data and update periodically based on comparables and studies. So there was some constraints because of COVID and the cost of doing an annual study, but they've been continually updating that on an ongoing basis as to studies in the market, both within CA and outside. So I'm not sure it's, I'm not prepared. You know, you're asking me a legal opinion.
Yeah,
I haven't done any research. Where I look. I can tell you that it strikes me as not correct to say there hasn't been an update since 2014. That's a little misleading. But, you know, I haven't affirmed the IRS code. I'm familiar with what the instructions state because I looked at those. just looking at it without doing any research, without looking at the code, without looking at any cases, I can understand how the argument can be made that what staff does meets the requirements, but I'm not prepared to give you a legal opinion on the spur of the moment without doing any research.
Understood. Alan?
Without getting into the legal thing, for me, are we just operating on 10-year-old data, or do we make estimates of inflation has gone up this much and we sort of update it informally beyond a study?
So we did a CAY, the last time we did a CAY compensation study, it was 172 positions were studied. That was in 2014, and the results were applied for 2015 and forward. So we typically have done them every 5 to 8 years, and I think many of you saw the responses that we did not do an org-wide one since we had planned to include it in a request for the 2020 budget, but then the HRIS application was prioritized instead, and then COVID hit. And we would not have we did not have the resources to support a study. They are expensive and very time-consuming to staff, and so we did not have the financial resources either to implement what recommendations come about. So since then, we have been using, the HR director uses independent, compensation benchmarking for new positions, for individuals and teams. When a position changes, so there have been ongoing checks of many positions, but we just have not done the comprehensive CAY one. And also we look at it with regulatory changes, when there was the big increase in minimum wage, for example. So that is not a requirement, but we do still periodically use them. We just have not done the full one at that point. So there were any other questions about?
I just want to say, hearing all that, I'm satisfied that checking yes on those boxes makes sense.
I do have one quick question. You said, how much does it cost to do such a study?
I don't recall what it was then. I'm sorry.
Reg?
So one of my concerns is actually, Susan, we have.
Reg, could you speak it into the mic?
Sorry. Normally, when we are looking for hiring a new president, we look at the cost of what everybody is getting across the board at other places, right?
Right.
So that's a comparison.
That happened last time and has been done again this time. That's right.
All right. So then we would have been capturing all that information since 2014.
Absolutely.
Okay. Thank you.
So one point I'd like to make on that is there's actually two questions. So there's one box, 15A, that refers to just the CEO, and then there's a second box that refers to other officers and key employees. So there's actually two separate questions.
So I understand that.
Okay.
But as you look at that, though, I mean, you go back into the history of the officers. Every time we've looked at pay raises, I mean, that discussion has come up. Well, what is so-and-so, what is across the board, what's being paid out? So I think we've actually, as I remember, we actually have been asking that question all along. So 2014, as John said, on the surface of it, it looks like, oh, okay, 2014, long time, but we've actually been looking at it over the years.
Sky.
When do you plan to repeat what you did in 2014?
We don't have it in this year's budget, so we just would take a look at that again every year. So I don't have a plan.
Okay.
So I guess along Sky's questions, how often should we be doing it? What's best practices for an organization of this size?
So we are keeping current with the competitive, with the studies and comparing this position. So it's a difference in approach. So I just want to make it clear that we are comparing market data to positions. We just haven't done it for the whole organization. So our practice was 5 to 8 years. And there's two approaches. You could do that whole big study periodically again, and we may do that, or we could continue to do it in components like we've been doing. So I don't have an answer for you tonight. We're still, again, we'd have to look at the burden on the workforce doing the project.
Sky.
So if you had planned to do it in 2020 and the world collapsed, if you had done it in 2020, then 5 to 8 years after that, I would think that by 2028, you should be doing it again.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Or before.
I also think that's an operational thing. I mean, the HR has a function unless we've got a concern, but each time that we are bringing on, I'm making some assumptions, so correct me if I'm wrong, but each time that we're bringing on a new position that hasn't been utilized before, my assumption is that we're going out to these benchmarks, salary grade structures, and looking across that to understand where a position should be benchmarked. And then every year, the assumption is that these salary grades are moving up based upon a variety of factors in the local economy. So I wonder on some levels if we have to do a full study as frequently. But I mean, I guess if the board wants to drive for that, we could make a decision about that, but it seems like it's an HR decision to manage that.
Susan?
And I would just say that we did not increase the ranges in 2021 and in COVID, and when we were in the throes of COVID, but otherwise we were. And not just in new position, and we use an outside consultant to provide that data, so it's not just us.
So I guess my other question, so when we do what I'll call the mini studies, and the question of the 990 doesn't apply to the entire organization. It really only applies to officers and key employees. So how often do we look at officers and key employees as far as comparisons with the mini studies?
So every time there is turnover in one of those roles, we look at that, or if the position's changed. We have not looked at them as a whole for a while, but.
Keith? So again, making some assumptions, but from an HR perspective, I'm assuming also that looking at things like comp ratio to see where it fits within a range.
Right.
So every year that the ranges move, there's every time someone's getting a merit, taking a look at where do they fall relative to 100% of the comp ratio to see if they're low in the range, high in the range, if the range is completely changed. So I'm, again, making assumptions, but I'm assuming that it's pretty comprehensive to look at this on an annual basis, and that's fairly standard for an organization.
You're right.
Are there any further questions on this topic? So with that, can I actually get a motion to approve the 990?
So moved.
Second.
Keith moves to approve the 990. We got a second by.
I think it's to accept. I don't believe.
I'm just reading the script.
You accept it, okay? Because it's approved by staff, and staff signs off on it, takes responsibility for it. The board accepts it.
What's the difference? So could you rephrase the motion as, can you get a motion to accept the IRS 990?
So moved.
And I'll second.
Okay, so we've got a motion to accept the 990, moved by Keith, second by Andy. I will call the roll. Chris? Yes. Ellen?
Yes.
Sky?
Yes.
Keith?
Yes.
Reg?
Yes.
Karen?
Yes.
Andy?
Yes.
And I will abstain. Motion passes 7-0-1. And that's the same thing. The next item on the agenda is board discussion, the new strategic plan, item 8A.
And Julia's going to introduce Deepa.
Good evening, everyone. My name's Julia Duran. I'm the Special Projects Manager here at CA, and tonight I'm very pleased to welcome back Deepa Srinivasan, who's the founder and president of Vision Planning and Consulting. She's going to be joining us remotely to give another update on progress on the strategic plan, and then to answer the questions that were raised during the January 11th, 2024 board work session. So we're going to get her queued up on Zoom and get her presentation, and we'll get started in just a sec.
No. Oh, touch being outside.
Good evening, all. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. I'll just give it a minute for the presentation to be uploaded. Okay, great. Guess we could switch to presentation mode. Wonderful, thank you. We can move to the next slide. So this evening, I'm going to be updating the board on what has been done since the last time we met, which was on the 11th of January. So in the past 2 weeks, there has been quite a bit of progress been made with respect to all of the meetings, and we've been working diligently with the various groups. So we met on the 17th and 18th, we met with the village manager and village board. We had 2 meetings. They were both hybrid, and all invitees from the 10 villages were invited to both meetings. We had a total of 20 members between the 2 days, and 8 out of 10 villages were represented. So we went through the objectives, the different strategic areas, the objectives, and we had some discussions on strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and also had the villages ask a few questions and then throw out some ideas in terms of potential actions to move forward under the various strategic areas. So after that, we also met with the community partners. We had a virtual meeting. And 5 community partners were represented at the meeting: veterans, the Howard County Library, Leadership Howard County, Downtown Columbia Downtown Partnership, and Meriwether Arts and Culture Center. So this meeting also, we followed a format where we identified strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and gave all of the members on this meeting a chance to express their opinions on what they would like to see and how they would like further interactions with CA to be. We've also been working closely with the SLT to finalize the mission and vision and the strategic priorities and objectives. And the review period ended a couple of days ago, so we're in the process of incorporating all of the comments. They were fairly minor in nature. Those comments are being incorporated, and they will be the final versions will be shared with the CA board at our work session on the 1st of February. So at this meeting we expect to go between an hour and a half and 2 hours duration. And during this meeting, we will review the mission and vision, the new mission and vision. We will review the strategic areas and the objectives, and have a discussion on any additional objectives that need to be included as part of the strategic plan, and also more specific actions and activities that need to be included under those objectives. So that is the update. That has been the progress as of the last couple of weeks. Any questions on the progress?
Alan.
Three questions. In our packet, at least, there's I guess it's not about the progress so much as about the survey. It says in the packet that the survey closed on the 8th, and yet we just received an email suggesting to people to take it. So is it still open, or is it closed?
The survey closed on the 8th of January.
That was the Clarabridge survey.
Yeah, there's a gym survey
That
also.
was the strategic plan survey. Never mind. Okay, my other questions. Clearly, I have survey fatigue. Which villages were not represented in the two meetings?
Owen Brown and Town Center.
And were there other community partners who did not come on the 18th?
Yes, I believe, I can give Andrew a minute to pull up the list. I believe there might have been a total of 15 or 16 partners that were invited, and so we do have a list that we can provide to you
I'd be
of
interested
those
to
who
see
did
that.
not attend the meeting.
Thank you. And you said that the leadership team suggested minor changes on the mission, vision, strategic priorities, and objectives. Minor changes from what we currently have, or minor changes from something new that you all had proposed, or what were those minor changes on?
The latter. It's what we had proposed, and we've had 2 work sessions with the SLT to craft the mission, vision, and objectives. So that is what they were commenting on.
Thank you.
Karen?
And I just wanted to mention one thing with respect to the 2 villages that were not represented, Owen Brown and Town Center. These were the meetings that were scheduled for village board members, but we are willing to do an additional virtual meeting if they agree to participate, because we do want to include all of the villages if we can.
Sky?
I'm not a village.
Oh, sorry. But I had actually Karen first. Karen and Sky.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on Alan's question about the community partners. Are you going to reach back out to the community partners who didn't attend on the 18th to try and have a meeting with them as well?
We have not talked to the CA staff about that, and we can certainly have a conversation to that effect.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. My mental cue got jumbled. Sky?
I'm not a village manager or a village board member. Well, I guess I am, but I attended the first of those 2 workshops, and it was probably the best workshop I've ever attended. The comments were excellent. It was very well run, and I was just blown away. Thank you.
Thank you, Sky. Much appreciated.
Chris?
So with the community partners, it sounds like there were many groups that were underrepresented in the initial survey. Is there going to be any effort put towards getting those demographics involved? What's the next step to reach out and try to get those demographics and their opinions incorporated into this?
I'm sorry, are you talking about the community partners that did not attend the meeting?
I believe he's referring to the survey that was presented at the last meeting. So the survey that was presented at the last meeting showed that we didn't necessarily cover the entire demographic spectrum of Columbia. So the question is there going to be a follow-up effort to reach out to those demographics that were underrepresented in the initial survey?
So not to my knowledge, as far as I know, that is not going to be part of this particular contract. And the way the survey was conducted was it was an open survey. It was not a targeted survey for specifically underrepresented populations. Because of the timeline that we were in, the way the scope was designed was for us to have an open survey that anybody could take. And it just happened that, the smaller groups, the minority groups were not well represented. So we can certainly have a follow-up conversation with the leadership to see how they want us to address this. But given the timeline, the very tight timeline that we have to complete the strategic plan, that is currently, it is not in discussion.
Chris, did that answer your question?
It did. Yeah, I just would hope that in the future, I know that it wasn't targeted, it was open, and it was open to anybody, and those groups happened to not be represented as much. So I think the next time this comes around, we should really put effort into finding ways to reach out to those underrepresented demographics.
Thanks. So, continue.
And then since we're on the survey topic, I do want to get back, if you recall, there were a few questions on the survey that were posed to us, and I want to sort of answer those questions. So if we can move to the next slide. Okay, so the question was asked about more clarity on the location. So in terms of where you live and work. So these are the survey results, and we've sort of segregated them by various categories. This was a multiple choice question. Everything that applied you could check. So obviously it doesn't total up to the total number of surveys, but if you're looking at the numbers, 742 people who answered the survey live in Howard County. A little over 100 live in Columbia. A little over 100 live in Howard County, but not Columbia. 16 of those who answered work in Columbia only. Only one works in Howard County. 128 live and work in Columbia. 38 respondents live in Howard County and work in Columbia. 42 respondents live in Columbia and work in Howard County. 20 respondents live in Howard County and work in Howard County. And then 9 are none of the above. They're outsiders. So this was a breakdown based on everything that was checked off.
So the question I have is, when we say Columbia, are we referring to a mailing address, so someone that has a Columbia mailing address, or someone living within the Columbia Association? Because you could have people living in Clarksville that live in the Columbia Association, and likewise, you could have people that live in the Columbia Association, that live in Columbia, have a Columbia mailing address, but don't necessarily live within the Columbia Association.
We wouldn't know that because the zip codes were not provided.
Thanks.
So I think it depends on how they interpret living in Columbia.
Andy?
Yeah, I would say that the survey is self-selected. I mean, it was each resident determined whether or not they lived in Columbia. So, I mean, that's what people said. People said they believe they live in Columbia.
Well, and that is a different question than do you live in CASS property?
Right, in the CASS property, because the question was, do you live in Columbia? And
because there's residents in River Hill that live in Clarksville,
right,
but are also in the Columbia Association. So, what would they check?
Well, what did they check?
I have no idea. I wasn't able to ask them. Any other questions on this bar chart?
Yeah,
So,
I mean, I think
Keith.
I think we need to understand that, though, because if the question is Columbia and we're leaving out parts of Columbia Association that are not Columbia, I think it'd be interesting to understand what that looks like.
Yeah, and it's not just Clarksville. The parts of Ellicott City that are also in the Columbia Association with the Ellicott City address. Any other questions on the bar chart?
Well, I'm just thinking it would be should be, well, do we have zip codes from these people or not? We don't, okay, then never mind.
Also,
Zip codes wouldn't help you anyway.
yeah, zip code, you could have people in the same zip code. Some people are,
Yeah.
because the way Columbia is sort of outlined, you could be in zip code 21044, for example, and be in CA or not be in CA.
Well, I was thinking more about the River Hill, Clarksville people, yeah, 21029 or whatever that is.
So they might be captured in like the 106 then? Is that how I'm processing?
I'm not sure.
Right.
And it's whatever they put down.
But they could also be Western Howard County.
It's not quite clear.
Well, if they lived in Western Howard County, they would put down live in county and not Columbia.
But yeah, it gets confusing when you have like River Hill, which half of River Hill is in Clarksville, and then, or
Yeah,
even
I
Dorsey
think it's
Search.
the way they interpret where they live. Like I said, they self-select. So any other questions on this particular slide? I do have a couple other responses to some other questions that were related to the survey that I want to go
Yeah,
over.
I don't see any further questions on this. So.
Okay, thank you. So the other question was asked about the demographics of respondents with respect to race and ethnicity. And so we were, and comparing it to Columbia against Columbia and CA populations, the survey numbers. So we are not able to compare it. We can compare it to Columbia's population, but not CA's, because CA doesn't track race and ethnicity of their members and residents. So just sort of wanted to inform the board about that. We went back and took a look to see what we could get out of CA, and they don't have that data. The other question was about it was a race-related question, and it was about how Hispanics being counted in another race and what else is counted in what was called another race. So the another race includes all responses that are not white, black or African American, American Indian, Native Alaskan, Asian, Native Hawaiian, or Pacific Islander. If you're not any of those races, then you would click another race. So Hispanic is sort of goes into the another race.
Should you be on a different slide, Deepa?
She's not controlling.
No, I don't have a slide for that. I was just making a, yeah. And then the final question we had was about facilities. What are considered facilities? Do facilities include paid facilities or all? So the question was framed as all facilities, paid and unpaid. So this could include pools, gyms, open space, etc. Anything that's considered a facility. So those were all the questions that were asked of the survey. Any other questions? Any further clarification?
Any other questions? Are you going to talk to this slide also, or?
Yeah, I'm going to talk to one.
Any other questions on the survey? Okay, continue. Thanks.
All right. And so the final, the final slide here is on next steps. As I mentioned, we are going to have the work session on the 1st of February. We will have a couple people in person, and I will be online. Andrea Strain and Mike Bayer from our office will run the session in person. And then once we're through with that meeting, we will go into strategic actions development, and that is formulated through staff interviews and other stakeholder meetings, and then we'll start draft.
Thanks. Any questions on the next steps? So I do have one question. So what's the type of inputs that you're expecting from the board on February 1st? Can you hear me? Did we lose you?
I think we lost her.
I think we lost her.
I'll check it out.
Hi, can you all hear me? This is Andrew.
Oh, perfect.
Hi there. I just want to follow up on your question for the board meeting on the on February 1st there. What we're going to be doing is reviewing the updated mission and vision, as well as the strategic focus areas and associated objectives with that. And we're just promoting an open discussion on how you guys feel about what we've developed with the team so far. That includes all of our senior leadership team meetings. That includes the village meetings, community group meetings, and staff interviews as well. And you guys are kind of the final touch point on getting your input before we make the draft plan. And then once we, over the next 2 months, we'll be able to start drafting the plan, and you guys will see that over the next couple months as well in future touch points. So that was just to answer your question on what to expect on the 1st.
Yeah, so I guess my question is, what do you want to see board members be thinking about over the next week, and what kinds of inputs are you expecting from us?
Sure thing. Yeah. Apologies for cutting out. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So I'll let Andrew chime in as well. So the middle of next week, we will provide you with the mission, the vision, the strategic areas, and the objectives for review. So you can start thinking about those categories and the ideas we've come up with in terms of the direction. Also thinking about anything else that we would need to include, whether it's an additional strategic area or additional objectives. So at the meeting, we'll have a discussion. We'll go through each strategic area. So we'll divide the meeting up into 4 or 5, time slots and go through each of these and get into the depths of the direction we want to go in under each of those areas. So that would sort of be the homework would be just to review what we send out middle of next week and, come to the meeting prepared to have a discussion. Andrew, please feel free if I've left out anything.
Good,
Nope,
thanks.
nothing further. Thank you.
Thanks. Any further questions on next steps? Any questions on the strategic plan in general? Thank you. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Next item on the agenda is the budget. That's item 8B.
And Susan has a PowerPoint.
Okay. And I've got.
Are we showing the draft budget now?
Yes.
Okay.
You have the microphone?
I'll take the mouse.
Oh, very good.
Thank you. All right, so good evening, thanks again.
Not sure anybody's getting you through the mic.
Okay, I got it. Okay, so we put together a few slides, the contents in the budget document that we received last week, but just to help focus everyone and get everyone looking at the same page. So the budget process, just as you know, the budget is probably the, more than anything else, the most tangible demonstration of the organization's values. And we've had multiple opportunities for community participation. There's, we really, I think you should feel good about this budget. I think you gave great strategic direction at the beginning with the priorities that you established back in September. And so we can walk through some of that. So back in September 28th, you voted for the following strategic priorities. Keith summarized these for us, and we reported these word for word here. So as we walk through the specifics, you'll see some of these things. I think it'll be pretty clear. We also had sort of auxiliary presentations and information on, thank you. Like for infrastructure, for example, when we went over the capital improvements plan, and you could see all of the tools that we use to produce the capital budget. And I did want to highlight that we did factor in the grants that you voted on back in December, so you'll see those as well on that page. All right.
Hey, Susan, while you're having a hard time moving off this slide, can I just ask a quick question about one of our strategic priorities?
Yes.
Can you back up?
Yep.
Did we say staff training? I thought we said we wanted to be an employer of choice, but I didn't think it was specifically around staff training. I thought it was more around, like, at the time we were having a discussion about lifeguards and retaining lifeguards and things like that. So I thought it was more, so I thought being an employer of choice was more than just staff training.
So this is word for word what you voted on, okay?
Yes.
So, there was more discussion about that, but this is what ultimately got approved.
Okay.
Thank you. Next slide. This is where we are. So we've started back in August with some online input. There were board discussions in September. You voted on those priorities. We had additional discussions in October, November, and December. You voted to give us the strategic guidance, and we are here now. We provided the draft recommendation. Next slide. And just to point out that tonight is the opportunity for your discussion, the community, and for you to listen. We have the new online feedback tool that opened up Monday and will be open at least through tomorrow. We'll probably hold that open over the weekend. Next thing. So this budget, next slide, please, has an format change that you'll notice we tried to streamline it more so than previously, and we've included the departments, but the divisions supporting each department without as much narrative detail, but still all the information's in the program. The highlights, so this does reflect full staffing for most programs and services, but we are struggling, and staffing continues to be very challenging. It includes the 7% increase in Howard County's minimum wage that goes into effect in January of next year, and that moves minimum wage to $16. So taking that into account, Howard County minimum wage has increased 36% since December of 2021, so pretty significant increases there. We do not have long-term debt issuances and no use of the short-term line of credit. However, it is possible we may need to do some very short-term borrowing first quarter of 2026, depending on the cash flow from the annual charge. So not in 2025, but possibly very soon after. Still continue to value and prioritize accessibility for Columbia residents in particular, and total financial support for the 10 village community associations is an increase of about 11% over FY24.
Yeah, question on the last bullet. What does that 7.1 billion include?
That includes the assessment share grant, the benefits that CA pays for the villages, the architectural covenant support, and the administrative, marketing, and other support for the organization.
Does that also include non-cash expenses such as depreciation?
Yes. Yes.
Thanks.
So next slide, just more key impacts. So I don't need to read these to you, but it does include the 23 outdoor pools. Reflects management of 3 outdoor pools by an independent operator for a pilot this summer. And lots of resources and staff and financial resources focused on open space, sustainability, and environmental preservation. So, and that was a key prioritization of the boards. It also, this year, starting in FY24, but the go live in FY25 is a customer relationship management application. And that's a major system initiative that will touch the whole organization. And we are continuing to designate specific resources to diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives. We're adding the belonging to just improve and make a greater commitment to these important initiatives.
Alan?
On that last bullet point, are these initiatives internal focus to CA staff, external focus to the Columbia community, both?
Some of both, but this is primarily focused on staff training, staff development, and workforce matters.
Reg?
Hey, Susan, just out of curiosity, you mentioned 3 pools that were going to be independently operated. Do you know which ones they are?
Yeah, I was going to turn that over to Dan in a bit, but
okay.
Yeah, we do.
Okay, thank you.
So the key elements of the budget, the next slide talks about the annual charge. As you know, it's keeping the rate and the cap the same as they were in prior year. It hasn't changed in quite a long time. Just reminding the community how those increases in assessed valuations are phased in equally over 3 years, and they can't exceed, increase can't exceed 3.5%. We would recommend increasing neither component. And we also remain, I just want to highlight this, very concerned about the impact on annual charge revenue of the commercial real estate situation. So I got an email today that newsletter The title is DC's office market enters its darkest hour, and it talks about literally the shocking plunge in office values in the district. And that's DC. The same thing is happening in Baltimore. It's office, it's retail, it's hospitality. We have seen that recently. We just are processing an abatement evaluation credit of $43,000 for one property. And this is a tsunami that's just waiting to happen. So we do have abatement reserves, we think, to cover it, but we'll see.
Karen, then Alan.
Yeah, so when you say you're concerned, are you just worried that our properties are no longer valued at what they're going to be valued at? Is that what your concern is?
Not our properties, the commercial annual charge paying properties.
Okay, I'm sorry, I was trying to grasp that. Okay, thank you, that's what I was looking for.
Right.
Alan?
And are these abatements money that we have to refund or money that we just won't get?
It depends on whether they've paid or not already. Right. So if they've already paid, it's a credit.
It might be cash we have and then we have to get back to them.
Right.
And I know the article you mentioned talks about office, and that's my understanding is because of telework and all that, it's really hit the office space. It's not my understanding, and I'm not an expert, that retail has been hit as much. So my question, although you mentioned both, do we have a sense, and I don't need an exact number of what, if we did a pie chart of office versus retail, commercial input into our top line, or do we have a sense of what that would look like?
I think it's predominantly off, well, I don't know. The mall is the single biggest payer. I don't have a sense for that. I think retail's at risk, though. I mean, there's also an article of Macy's closing additional stores, so that's certainly a concern. Anything you want to add, Lynn?
I think we could probably get the data, but we don't have the actual data.
Thank you.
Eric?
Karen?
Yeah, let me ask another question. Susan, do you know what the office occupancy is now in Columbia for the office space? How many commercial office buildings are assessment payers here in? Because, I mean, I drive on Santiago Road. I'm trying to remember how many.
Yeah, I don't have that. So I don't have that off the top of my head. We could look to see if we could get that, but the owners, we have the data by owner who may own more than one, but we can look into that. We'll see what we can do.
Dennis?
So I think the other risk is that some people who have leases that have not expired yet have downsized or have more hybrid workers. So they're paying their leases at the full, the space they took 3 years ago.
Right.
But when they come up for renewal, they'll take less space.
That's exactly what's
that's a risk.
happening. Right.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what I was asking. I mean, even where I work, we downsize to a much smaller space.
Right.
So, yeah.
So when that lease comes up and the tenant wants to renegotiate or leave entirely, then the value is impacted.
Andy?
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking, we always think about downtown Columbia for people moving in, but, Gateway is almost, I mean, it's literally all office. And then you've got offices in the commercial all along Snowden River and Dobbin, and then you have the Oak Ridge Industrial Park, and then you have Kings Contrivance. I mean, so there's a lot of, I'll say, buildings around that are office or commercial that, we need to be concerned if we get a lower value for those properties, because that will impact
I just
us.
would be interested, Andy, I'm sorry for jumping on. I would be really interested to know, what is current occupancy? Is there some kind of trend we can look at to kind of brace ourselves for that? When we were looking at the capital improvements plan last time and things like that, some kind of environmental study, I think that's what they call it, to understand that type of stuff. So
I guess the question I have is, we're 6 months into the fiscal year. How much money in abatements have we already experienced, and how much do we project for the rest of the fiscal year?
I don't have that exact number off the top of my head. We have it in the records. I think at this point in the fiscal year, we're not likely to see that much as we go into the last couple months of our fiscal year because of the timing when the property owners there's a calendar for when they have to file for an abatement. And as the property districts are reassessed, each district that comes up for reassessment has a timeline under which they can challenge their assessed value. So it can happen at different times a year. And there's a backlog. There's still a backlog that we're dealing with in terms of the processing of these requests. So it's very difficult to predict. But because of the way the calendar works, I wouldn't expect to see substantial decreases between now and April 30th.
Okay. Ellen?
If I'm a landlord, or I own a building, office building, is the value of my building affected by whether I've got it leased or not?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions on the annual chart, Karen?
Yeah, so I'm looking at the income here, and it says commercial industrial annual charge is 18 million. And what we're saying is that it's like a percentage of that is the office space, and that's really where the focus of concern is?
And retail and hospitality. But the most of the media coverage is on office space.
Yeah, nobody wants to go back to the office.
Right.
So, but yeah, I honestly, I think that is actually where the focus, I think that's where our focus we might want our focus to be on that, right?
So I would have said that, except we processed this year a $43,000 credit for a hotel. So it's not just office space, and it is predominantly office space.
So my question is, so in FY25, we're, for the annual charge, we're projecting $48.8 million. Does that take into account this potential trend, or would we need to rethink that?
No, we feel that we factored that in at this point, right. If we can look at the next slide, talking just an overview of memberships and fees. So, we continue to price the programs and services to encourage participation to the greatest extent possible, specifically to make it accessible and affordable to CA residents. So and Dan chime in here on this, but we do some market studies of other facilities in the areas, and then we use those to set the non-resident rates. So the intent and the goal is to set non-resident rates as close to market as possible, and then to discount the resident rates significantly. Did you want to add anything to that, Dan, or? Oh, sorry.
Ellen?
Does community programs and services include lifeguards?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so we've looked at all of the competitive market, and there's a lot. And every year there's more and more and more. And Anytime Fitness opened up this year in Oakland Mills. Planet Fitness opened last year. Thankfully, Lifetime Fitness, who's over by Supreme, has decided that the more expensive they can be, the better. They are now at $189 for a single person. And they don't do family memberships. It is a very diverse market. And we present the greatest value in the market. Like Planet Fitness they have a $9.99 membership, but the average membership is the $19.99 membership. They don't even offer group fitness. We have over 300 classes a week. And our single club membership is $62. So there's great value there. The pools, you look at some of the competitive pools, like Athlon has one pool, and it's close to $1,000 a year for a family. Ours is $400, just a little under, between $400 and $500 for the family for the summer, without a bond. So we continue to provide significant value for what our residents get.
And you'll see, I'm sorry, the rates are in the draft budget document as well.
The rates are on pages 85 and 86. Keith?
85 and 86?
85 and 86.
Just, I guess philosophically, when we see a 7% minimum wage increase, how does the budget deal with compression? So, I'm assuming that everyone in the entire organization isn't getting 7% because
No.
of the baseline, but do you factor that through the?
So we did not build in any real compression adjustments in this budget. It's just the 4 months, so we're going to take a hard look at that for next year.
So we actually, in some cases, we do.
Well, the aquatics.
Aquatics particularly, we have to, because we have a varied amount of bands.
Okay.
That are very close together. But in general, we look at it for a dollar increase. We don't have a tremendous amount, but when it went up a couple dollars a couple years ago, that impacted the entire organization. But we do pay attention to that, and where we see it happening, we account for it. But we know that ahead of time when we know what the changes are.
It was significant 2 years ago with a big jump, and we had many positions impacted and a significant increase in cost.
Thank you.
Sky?
Do you know what percentage of the individual memberships are residents versus non-residents?
Yes, and we report that quarterly, but if you want to.
So we have a little over 17,000, and I'm going to give ballpark numbers here. A little over 17,000 memberships, and between 10 and 11,000 of those are resident memberships, and obviously the rest are non-resident.
Any other comments or questions? I guess my comment on this is that when we talk about value for the residents, I think value is really what you're getting, but also what you're paying. And when we look at what residents are paying, it's really a two-part thing. It's not just the rates, but it's also the annual charge, which is significant. So when we look at value, I think we have to sort of compare both parts of what residents are paying, and also keep in mind that some of the annual charge goes into the upkeep of the gyms and the pools and all the capital expenses that go into keeping the gyms, pools, and other facilities operational.
Yes.
Right.
So any other comments? So,
Okay,
thanks.
Staffing and personnel, just to move to the expense side, the next slide, yes, please. Nothing really, so I think most of this is in the transmittal letter. Personnel costs account for about 46%. That's right about where we typically are, between 44 and 46%. And that's, we're a service organization, right? So with a lot of buildings. So recruiting continues to be a challenge. We want to, maintain our ability to attract and retain really quality staff. So we're focusing on training, staff development, and the tools. We're working really hard to make sure that the HRIS is functioning better and at a more serviceable level for staff and managers. And we also, the customer relationship management system will also help with that. This incorporates team member merit pay increases 3.5% to potentially 4%. But that again, these are all, CA only does merit increases, so it's based on a performance appraisal, not a cost of living adjustment.
Ellen?
That's what I was going to ask.
How do we arrive at 3.5% to 4%?
Just trying to keep something moving forward. We know we can't meet inflation, but we're just doing our best to try to increase the pay for our staff members.
Reg?
So basically, it's an averaging of percentage. So it could be, someone could get a little bit more than
It could
that.
get,
Someone
right,
could get
a little bit
lower.
more,
So
right. And some people would get potentially nothing, depending on performance.
Okay.
Next slide, hitting the highlights on the capital budget. So $13 million this year. It's an 18% increase over last year, 63% increase over 22 of $8 million. We're maintaining that movement back towards pre-COVID funding. Clearly addresses the board's goals of environmental sustainability, as was noted when We talked through the capital improvements program. This budget has us again achieving replacement cycles that are aspirational for other organizations, so particularly in the open space amenities area. We do focus on this budget also helps that 13 million, helps us move towards some amenity refreshes and improvements, such as the Lake Kittamakundi dredging is in the budget, Stonehouse Art Center improvements, next phase of those, and some work at Supreme too. So some movement there, which is favorable. So next slide. This information is all in the budget document and also in the transmittal letter, just summarizing some of the highlights. So $1 million again for Art Center renovations. I just thought I'd tally up, where we are on that program to improve and renovate those buildings, Stonehouse and Art Center. $3.3 million before this amount. So good investment in those buildings. They're big, they're old, and kind of complicated. So it's expensive renovation. Significant investments in pathways and pedestrian bridges, et cetera, lake kit dredging, and other community programs and services, open space. So major Cat 3 allocations, you can see here the outdoor pools, there was a question about that last time, Village Community Association projects and other open space projects. Thanks.
Our Village Community Association projects, meaning projects done on the buildings we own or other kinds of things in the community?
We would, so on our buildings, if it's on buildings that CA does not own, it would be a grant.
But I'm thinking like in our village, there's a cemetery that we've been talking to Chris Clem about. Would that go in that number, or would that go somewhere else?
Well, that's an operating commitment, so that's in our operating budget.
Okay.
And so just thank you for your strategic guidance this year. I think that was really helpful, and I hope you feel good about it. A lot of hard work by the leadership team and the accounting division, as always, pitching in under challenging circumstances this year, driven by, the COVID realities and other illness-related absences and the timetable that we were working under, and the team members who just have been extraordinary. So quick, again, if you would, I wanted to also just remind you one more, please. Thanks. Where we are, so CA's in a very sound financial condition, again, thanks to your leadership and the team's hard work. We have made, they've been very, very successful at managing expenses to revenues. We've been very deliberate and innovative on the planning. We've been really thoughtful in the review. We have a strong cash position, thanks again to the board's approval of emergency cash reserve. When in March of 2020, when we had to shut down, the state mandated that, we had no real cash reserves, and we were using our line of credit and had to work very hard to get out from under that situation. So the balance in the emergency cash reserve as of April 30, 2023, year just ended, is $8,133,000. That's about 1.2 months of expenses for CA. So it sounds like a lot of money, but that's not a huge reserve. Let's see what I want to say. So what is happening in the environment, because we're all dealing with that. We're seeing inflation beginning to moderate for many items, but not all. High interest rates. I personally am now lowering my expectations for rate reductions in 2024. I thought they were, I think we will see some, but not what I had originally hoped. We'll see. And then for the staff, recruiting and retention, it's about the tools and about staff development and making this a place where people want to work and where we can support them in their careers. Lots of detailed numbers here. This is page 8 in the budget, in the hard copy budget. I don't know what it is online. Just want to point out that this is a kind of a modified cash approach. This is most like your personal budget. It's cash in and cash out. Shows the relative uses and reliance on the annual charge income. it shows the cash deficit. So this year we are using, as we did, as we projected for last year, to use the cash that we have from the 2021 financing and prior year results, the grants that we received, et cetera. So not a problem, not a deficit from an accounting standpoint, and we aren't in a deficit position for cash balances, but we are using cash that we had accrued in prior years. Next slide. This is nice, the view that this is page.
Can you go back a slide for a
Oh, I'm
second?
sorry.
So I'm trying to wrap my head around the negative $21 million for investing financing. Can you discuss what that number means?
Well, 13 million of that is the capital budget.
Okay.
And the rest is debt repayment, and
Emergency cash.
and and 3 million potentially for the emergency cash reserves.
Okay.
Those three items.
Okay.
Someone else
Thanks.
have a question? I thought I saw another.
I don't see any other questions.
Next slide, this is page 10 in the budget. This is another, again, cash basis showing you, Karen, I think you had already taken a look at this about where, where the money comes from and how it's used. One thing I wanted to point out, so community programs and services on the far left there, the yellow, $32.7 million is now 106% of the residential annual charge. So more than what the residential annual charge brings to the organization. So I thought that was worth calling out. And then here, Eric, you can see debt repayment of 5.2 million, capital expenditures of 13, and the 3 million in emergency cash reserves is 21. Yeah.
Alan?
Well, wait a minute. Going back to the point you just made, and I apologize that I have an old brain, so I think of old terms. So I think of sports and fitness. I know we don't use that term anymore. Does community programs and services generally get paid by the annual charge, or does community programs and services generally get paid by either memberships or fees paid for services?
So generally, so if you look, so community programs and services now includes all of the recreational and fitness facilities, the pools, school-age services, the art center, and other archives and things like that.
So could you help me understand the point you were trying to make?
Right. Well, just the point was that, so we talk a lot about the annual charge and the reliance on the organization on the annual charge. But the single largest contributor to the cash in are these community programs and services. Yes.
Karen?
But I think what Dan said earlier is we have 17,000 members, and of those 17,000 members, 11,000 of them are residents, so still the bulk of our income is coming from residents.
Absolutely, but they're choosing to do this. They're choosing these services and to engage. Yes.
So as I pointed out in a previous conversation we had, the non-residents pay such a significant difference that the gap between the revenue membership-wise we get from residents and non-residents is not nearly as big as the gap in the volume of residents versus non-residents.
Right, but to go back to Eric's earlier point, all the residents are paying the assessment, and that's going to the upkeep of the gyms and all these things that those non-residents are using the gyms, but they're being, this goes back to our.
So if you go back a
our
slide.
request that we want more, we want to increase the residents' membership, whether they belong or not.
Right.
And I have to say, 11,000 is a really small number when you think, it's what, is it 10%? I'm doing math here in my head. We have 105,000.
Those are memberships, not members. 11,000 memberships.
We have over 50,000 members.
Okay, so 11,000, what's the average number of people on a membership?
Well, if it's over 50,000.
It's approximately 50, right. Approximately 50,000 people in those 11,000 memberships.
No, in the
total, I'm so
17,000.
sorry, right.
So there's 50,000 people in the, okay.
17, right.
But 11,000 memberships, how many how many people are in that? Can you extrapolate that?
So if it's.
Times 3.
About 33, 35,000.
Somewhere in there.
Okay, so that gets to around the 25%, but that's the number we would really like to see increased, is we want to see, since residents are subsidizing the gyms, I mean, I think the argument that you're trying to make, Dan, in all fairness, is you're trying to say, well, the non-residents are subsidizing the residents, and I don't think that's actually true. I think through the assessment, the residents are still subsidizing all of it.
So look at the slide that's up here, Sal. So the community programs and services, cash income, $32,662,000. Cash operating expenses of $32,179,000. There's an administrative allocation of $2,941,000. So the annual charge and interest income, because it's both, it's all, both, that is used for that whole department is $2,458,000.
So that's $2,458,000, that's just on a cash basis.
Right,
That doesn't include depreciation.
correct.
So, and that doesn't include capital expenditures. So when you go back to the pie chart, and I forget which chart it is, where we show that I don't think it actually was in this presentation, but there's that bar chart that was presented last meeting where we show, here's the annual charge dollars, this is where it's going. The annual charge dollars are going to the capital budget. And a good portion of the capital budget is going to the sports and fitness programs. So that $2.4 million doesn't encompass the amount of upkeep that the residents are paying to support the facilities that constantly need upgrading, whether it's a new diving board for $8,000 or a new whole bunker system on Fairway.
So the annual charge is not the only thing supporting the capital project. It's all the cash flow from operations. Right? So do you want to point out anything else?
The annual charge is already supporting $2.4 million of community programs. So it's got to be supporting the capital.
Art Center?
It's got to be supporting, but it's also got to, if we're already in the hole by $2.4 million, that's coming from the annual charge. Therefore, anything else is also coming from the annual charge. Keith and Ellen.
I just wanted to, I understand discussing and trying to unpack.
Trying to understand all this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. To unpack, I'll point this way so you don't think I'm pointing at you. To unpack all of the numbers, but I'm trying to just, if I can if I can understand or put into words rather than looking at all of the numbers, what you're concerned about. And I assume that this is similar, but is it just getting more residents to use it, or is it lowering the cost for residents?
We're offering all these great things. Dennis shows us all these lovely videos of all the hard work that's going on. Mm-hmm. And I just really would like to see there be more resident involvement. And I'm not, I want when we said we wanted to make things affordable and accessible, I really, when we talk about how much the residents are paying, I want us to take into consideration the comprehensive picture. It feels like what we're saying here, what I hear is, but the non-residents are paying so much more, they're really subsidizing the residents, and I don't think that's actually true. I think it's probably an apples to apples. You're paying this much more, but they're paying it through their assessment. And some of the people paying the assessment aren't using our facilities. So we need to, and I think our revenue would go up if we got way more residents. You take the prices down, say, I want to increase my membership to 30%. 25% is too low. I want to increase my membership to 30%. What's the price? Like, how can I price my resident rate so that I increase it that way? And I'm not trying to do your job for you here, Dan, but I'm just saying those are the kinds of things I want us to consider, is that when we're talking about the assessments that residents are paying, remember, all of them cannot afford, no matter how low you make those prices, they can't all afford to do it, right?
Absolutely.
So,
right. So you want to.
And a lot of those people, to continue this on, a lot of those people are the people who didn't answer the survey.
Right.
So when we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, are we bringing these people into our facilities? Are we offering them something, And I'm not saying we're not trying. I know about the points program and all that kind of stuff, but
that's what I was hoping to just to finish up. That's what I was hoping to clarify, because we're digging deep into the actual numbers, and I think it's a little bit less about this, and it's probably more needs to show up in the strategic plan as to what we want, how we want to see things shift is my thought. It's not about the calculations or how much we're allocating. And what I hear is that even the answers that staff is providing is trying to defend, this compared to that and so on and so forth. But I think it's just a more basic issue of we want residents to utilize these services more, to create more value. And where appropriate, give it to them for free, right? If it's in the summer pools, for instance, or something along those lines.
But you know what, so Keith, thank you. I think that clarifies a lot of what I'm trying to say. I think it's our mindset about how we talk about it. That's the part, I don't think you guys are doing it intentionally, but sometimes it does feel like we're very dismissive of the residents, and that's the mindset I'd like us to change. I think it could inform our decision-making on some of these things.
Thank you.
So Keith, to sort of,
I thought I was next to the queue.
Okay, Alan.
And thank you, Keith, for raising the level of the conversation. What I would add, or maybe it's the way I look at it, maybe saying the same thing that you are. You said, and I agree, that a budget is the first and highest expression of the values of a company. And I really like this last column, but what I'm hearing Eric, for example, ask for is to keep refining it. Because I've always been asking all the years that I've been on the board. So a basic question for me is, how much do we expect residents through the annual charge that everybody has to pay to subsidize whatever we do? And how much do we expect it to be fee-for-service, people pay for it? And fine-tuning that and figuring out what goes into that and all the costs, to me, is answers, or at least response to a very basic values question.
Right.
And I'm glad we are. If we've had this column in the past, I haven't noticed it. If it's new, I appreciate it, and I would appreciate us continuing the discussion of fine-tuning it so that it's as accurate as possible, taking into account everything that it ought to take into account.
Yeah, I agree, actually, if I can get in, then I'll get to you.
Go for it.
Yes, I agree, Alan, and I think there's really two components. Karen talked about accessibility. I also want to talk about going back to our board priorities, affordability. And affordability is not just the rates for residents. Affordability is also the annual charge. And I look at my annual charge bill. I look at, there's a neighborhood that popped up right next to River Hill, and I've seen their homeowners association bills, and you add their homeowners association bills plus the non-resident pool membership, it's still less than my annual charge bill. So I think that's a piece of affordability that we might want to address. Keith?
So I was going to say, I was getting excited about what was being said, but I want to make sure that when we're talking about the numbers, we can't just do this apples for apples, because the money that we pay is covering far more, right? And I don't want to get the debate. That's why I was trying to separate, because I don't want to get the debate into, okay, this is how much they're paying versus how much we're paying, and try to justify that, because there's a whole lot of other services that are being provided outside of just gyms and so on and so forth. But what I get excited about is, as we start to develop these conversations, what are those key metrics truly? Because we've got a million metrics that we have in our quarterly thing, and we don't really spend a lot of time discussing them strategically. But what are those key metrics that we want to look at and to drive, so that we can say, okay, to the staff, we need this number to move. Okay, not necessarily what's the 2.9, 32, all of these numbers, but we've got to figure out strategically what are those metrics that we just want to see do a better job with. And then once we understand those, let's say 5, 6 things because you can't move everything, right? But if there are 3 to 5 things that we want to see move strategically, then if we actually talk about those at a board meeting and just look at those 3 to 5 metrics and get reporting on all of those pieces, I think that's going to help us versus digging down into this and trying to compete with the numbers and so on and so forth, because we're never going to get an apples to an apples or be able to say that the person next to me is paying more. But if we're looking at value, those 3 to 5 metrics, I think that's where we're going to get our answer.
And I think that's actually a great topic, especially for when we talk about the strategic plan in a week, to really discuss what those metrics that we care about as a board and how we can move them strategically.
And also look at them.
And look at them.
Okay.
I just wasn't going to do a blind. I thought that was assumed.
I mean, I don't want to assume that just because we say it, that we're going to look at them, but there's like, we can't look at 50. We have to look at like 3 and say that that's what we want to do relative to the plan, and then look at them every quarter or every month or whatever the frequency is, because that's going to give us the meat of this conversation. Because it's frustrating to try to make all these numbers work in our heads and do the calculations. We need to get something that's more at our level, frankly.
Any other comments on Andy?
Yeah, I just wanted, I did a really quick look at the capital budget. And if you look even like the significant capital projects, 5 million of it goes to open space, yeah, in the environment. And about 1.4 million is going to community services. So I don't want residents and to get the wrong impression to think that most of the capital budget is going to facilities. A lot of the capital budget, just like a lot of the annual charge, is going to the environment. It's pathways and dredging and all those other types of things. So we do spend money on, open space environment. It's not all just, gyms.
I think the danger, Andy, is right where you're going, because we're trying to justify again these numbers and make them all match up, and we're just not gonna get there. We can discuss and argue it all we want. The bottom line is like really us doing our work and figuring out again what are those 3 things that we want to move, and stop trying to do this whole budget thing, because we're not going to get an answer. It just isn't going to work. We need to, spend some time strategically.
So you're saying we shouldn't go through all the type 3 expenses and try to track every single diving board and pool filter?
It might be time for me to go bathroom break.
We can, time, I just want to know how much time there's left. Sorry, I can't tell.
I can't see.
We can always add time.
We can always add time.
Okay.
At least 15 minutes.
Yeah, we can always add time.
Okay. So we can move forward to, I think, no, we can, move again. Go one more, please. So this is just to orient you to the overall CA-wide P&L, basically, in the budget document, page 22. The center 4 columns highlighted in green, I think should just focus on those. This is on a GAAP basis, so it's accrual basis. Big difference here, you see depreciation expense and not CapEx or debt repayment. And we recommend looking at the estimate versus the budget because it's more updated, it's been refreshed and reflects the current expectations. So shows combined membership growth of membership income growth of about 11%. Personnel expenses going up about 4%. The fees you see are significant, and that's IT project, that CRM work, open space and environmental and land maintenance activities. We see insurance, again, market estimates looking pretty steep, and depreciation, new capital projects, new assets. So just to hit the highlights there of those big increases.
I have a question on this. So I see our total income is going up 4% or
yes,
relative to the estimate, and our total operating expenses going up 7% relative to the estimate.
That's correct.
So if our expenses are outpacing our income, how much of a problem is that long term?
It would be a problem long-term. This is a 1-year look, and we'd be factoring that into our 10-year projection, but clearly it would be a problem long-term.
I guess at what point would it become a problem?
We'd have to look at that on the 10-year plan.
Okay.
Do we have any concerns on our 10-year plan? Is this a trend?
With the growth, the percentage growth in expenses outpacing the percentage growth in income and the impact on our 10-year plan. You'll see that before the end of the fiscal year when we produce a plan for your review. Capital budget, next 2 slides, please. So it's adequate for normal maintenance. It does fully fund most asset replacement cycles. Again, we've had multiple community input surveys, and the community continues to prioritize maintaining existing assets versus adding new ones. One of the challenges that, this is a challenge long-term, is that we own a lot of stuff. We own too much stuff to maintain long-term and to add new things. There's just, that will be very clear.
Keith? So that piece is, when we say that versus adding new ones, that's like net new, not tearing down, let's say tearing down and replacing, or consolidating and replacing, right?
It would be right.
Another tot lot or another pool.
Mhm.
Okay.
And it wasn't really broadly defined in the survey, but that was the intent.
So you're saying we own too much? Does that mean we need to consider divesting in some of our facilities?
Certainly, look, we've talked about this before, tot lots, neighborhood centers, pools. We own an awful lot on a per capita basis, far more than anyone else, and it's just going to be difficult to sustain those over time.
So what would you be recommending divesting?
Nothing this year.
No, I know nothing this year, but long-term strategically.
I'm not prepared to discuss that this evening.
That's a good, I mean, it's a good question, but it's a good strategic dialogue, right?
That's what I'm trying to,
that's
what I'm trying to figure this out.
It's not budget, though. That's our strategic plan.
Well, I mean, keep in mind that the budget is part of the strategic, it's part of the general strategy. This is one iteration of a long-term strategy. So
Arguably the last year of the current strategy.
But it also is going to impact the next year. Any further questions on the capital improvements?
And I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying. I think what I am saying is that we need to have those really hard conversations, and they may not be politically fun and all that stuff, but that's what the board needs to do, is to have those conversations as part of the strategic plan, and then that'll inform this, in my opinion. But really what you've done in the budget is you've said that you don't have any divestiture plans. I can't even really say that word, but you don't have any plans built in here to do that because the board hasn't given guidance as to making any of that happen. So
that's correct.
I guess one other, it's not really a question, but sort of an off-the-wall idea is, so we got 13 million this year, and we have Dennis presented at the last meeting the capital improvement plan that was it $150 million over 10 years, roughly, and that's a fair amount of money that we're going to have to invest in. And I realize that the way we do it now is it's on a, basically we take it out of the difference in revenue and expenses, so we sort of are on a pay-as-you-go system. But the question I have strategically is, does it make sense to try to create a fund to make sure that we've got all those expenses lined up, and we've got a fund to make sure that those are going to be paid for long-term?
Yeah, I think if I can answer, I get excited again about that conversation because that's the strategy, right, that we're talking about. Because if you have 100 million or whatever the number is over time, do we divert some of that in some fashion because we want to do something completely different in terms of our growth strategy? So
Yeah, I guess the concern I have is when we only look at things 1 year at a time, it's very easy, like in a computer science program, I take this path, I take that path. If we're not looking at it holistically, I can wind up in a dead end.
Oh, yeah.
So it's important when we look at problems that we look at things at a high level view. So it's like, okay, can we make sure that we're not going into a dead end after going through each iteration of the budget, but making sure that we plan ahead over the next 10 years so that we're not giving up facilities that people really enjoy and facilities that people move to Columbia specifically to enjoy.
That's exactly what we do as a staff.
But as a board, my question is, should we start looking at creating a funding source to make sure that the next $150 million can be funded for? Any further questions on capital expenses? Thanks.
So we can just move forward. This really wraps up what I wanted to help you focus on. You can keep going to the you're in discussion. One more. So our next meeting, further discussion. We'll have some survey data for you, hopefully, and that's it. Any further discussion?
Okay, so so I know we've asked a lot of questions. So I'll open up to certainly questions, but also do people have any comments, concerns about the budget that they want to address that haven't already been addressed? Going once, going twice. Thank you.
Welcome.
Did you want to say something about the budget?
No, but I'm next then.
Oh.
1C.
Okay, 1C. Next is the staff bonuses.
So first of all, they are retention incentives. And let me back up. In November, I went to Susan and others and said, look, I'd like to try to find a way to do something for staff for retention. And the unemployment rate in Howard County is 1.4, 1.6%. So there's almost no one out there to hire. And these are the people that are out at 3 a.m., with a salt brine and plowing snow, and they're folding towels and they're cleaning bathrooms. We're not like a high-level organization. We're not giving people $50,000 bonuses. These are incentives that are very progressive in nature. And by that, I mean they're the same regardless of salary level. So someone who is cutting grass gets so much more out of this retention incentive than someone who's at a higher level. And I've exempted myself. I can't give myself money as much as I'd like to. But, so these are very important. And Susan has a great saying. She says, no margin, no mission. I say no staff, no CA, right? It starts with staff. It starts with people in cutting grass and folding towels and at the lakefront for the events that we have, at the art center. This is not a bonus. This is not big money. And CA is not this organization that has 100 people making $200,000 a year. We are a very flat organization. We have a lot of people who are barely getting by. I go to the out in the field open space offices, to the gyms. These are people that this money would mean so much to, and would keep them thinking, and working for CA. So if you want to blame someone, I was the one that brought it up. I think it's a great idea. It is not a bonus, and it is a very progressive incentive that benefits the people that do the work that we want to do each and every day.
Alan, and then Reg.
Those of you who are fellow NPR junkies may have heard today there was an interview with somebody talking about labor hoarding. And it's a term I hadn't heard before, but the idea is that given the low unemployment, companies need to do what they can do to keep the labor they got and hoard it, because if you let it go, it's hard to get it back.
And I should have said, we have 30 or 40 openings on our site. We're looking, we are hiring people or looking for people all the time. We don't have 50 extra people that we're giving.
Reg?
Okay, excuse me. So I think there's a misperception. I initially, when I heard about it, so I thought, or I think the corporate thinking is that when we're talking about these incentives, we're talking about the upper part of our Columbia Association, that it was going to be the top tier that was going to be getting all the incentives. So that's what you're saying is that is not, in fact, true.
Correct. It is incredibly progressive. It gives to the person that's making, let's pick a number, 60,000. That for him might be 5%, but for the few that make 100 or 110, they're going to get 2 or 3%. And think about how much more important it is for the person making 60,000 to get that money. They're trying to decide whether to put milk on the table or buy gas in many cases.
So who makes that decision? I just want to finish up. Who makes the decision as to who gets what?
So it's equal. So it's different for different, if you're full-time, part-time, a certain number of hours per week, but across that spectrum. So every full-time person, excluding the president, it's equal.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I want rank and file to be retained. I think, Dennis, giving rank and file folks a bonus is important. Retention incentive. What I'm concerned about is the questions I'm getting is, how are we paying bonuses, retention incentives, when my pool closed early? So you're kind of saying to me is, I want to make sure the personal trainer, I want to make sure the lifeguard, I want to make sure the customer-facing employees I want to make sure that they feel appreciated, and I agree with that. Are you saying that senior leadership is not taking any of this money, or they are also getting this money?
So I would like not to exclude senior leadership, but for the sake of, and I excluded myself, but every person is, I don't want them to get the idea that they're not as important as everyone else that works for the association. But with that being said, if this needs to, if this feels better to the organization, then I think the senior leadership would accept that. It wasn't my goal to do that, but I would, to move this forward, I would do that.
Keith? Alan had his hand up first.
Alan, then
I
Keith.
just think it's important to clarify for people in the public particularly that we didn't close pools because we didn't have enough money to run them. We closed them because we didn't have enough lifeguards to staff them to keep them safe.
Yeah.
And now that could be related back to money because we didn't pay the lifeguards $100,000 a summer to stay. And so there is some wiggle room in there, but it's this kind of money that we're talking about would not have, that's a strategic thing we could talk about is that important enough to really raise lifeguard salaries? But wasn't really a money thing that stopped us from keeping all the pools open.
We didn't have staff.
We didn't have staff,
right? And this is a retention incentive that we're talking about.
Trying to keep the staff.
So we're talking about trying to keep staff. So I'm saying, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah.
But I'm concerned that several years in a row, we've closed pools early.
Because we didn't have staff to run them.
Because we didn't do what we were supposed to retain those staff. So the people who are making the decisions, the people at the top who are making these decisions, several years in a row, close pools early. And I'm looking for a way, you tell me how I go back to my village and explain that.
Keith and Chris. Keith? Yeah, there's a whole lot to unpack there. So I want to roll back, and when I hear that there's 50 open positions or so. 40 open positions.
40 open postings, multiple positions sometimes.
Okay.
Right.
That also means that the people who are doing the work are doing more work in order to keep things moving. So I just wanted to make sure that was understood. In terms of the pools, what I understood from the discussion about the pools is that we were offering incentives at that time to try to hold on to people, but there were other factors. Now, what I hear you saying, I'm just going to call out the elephant in the room, is did senior leadership do enough strategically to figure out how to solve the problem, right? And I think that's a very important conversation to have. I don't know that I don't know that it's going to drive these dollars necessarily, because my personal opinion is that these dollars are operational decisions that are being made versus board decisions. But I also want to say that what you're saying to me or to the group is that we want to hold senior leadership accountable into the future, right? Mm-hmm. So trying to do all of that right now is challenging for me. But I do think that we need to take a look at it and say, look, we have to solve these problems, and it's on you guys to solve these problems. And I think we just have to have direct conversations about that, and just as a board, drive that forward. That's what I hear you saying, and I agree with you that we have to solve the problem. That's not the board's job, it's the staff's job to figure out how to make sure that occurs, not to come back year over year and tell us that we have to close pools again because kids had to leave and this had to da-da-da-da, so on and so forth. We have to figure out plan B, is what you're saying, I think.
Yeah.
Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I really want to disconnect the whole pools thing from the money. I don't think there was any amount of money that realistically could be offered to those lifeguards to make them stay. That it's college kids going to school, going back to wherever they're going. I don't think there's any connection here between that and the retention incentives at all. So I want to make sure that we're disconnecting those two concepts. If you need to explain to people in your village why that they had to close pools early, I refer you to the presentation that we got several months ago from, what was his name? Marty, where he really succinctly said exactly why all of the pools need to be closed and why the specific pools need to be closed. So I would really like to disconnect that from this conversation about the retention incentives, because we really need to make sure that we are keeping this talent, because, as Keith said, people are doing more with less because we have all these open positions. We need to make sure that staff feel appreciated for the work that they're doing. And I think this is a good way to do it. I think making sure that it is focused on the right people, which I think that what is proposed is. I haven't looked too closely at it, but it looks like, it is progressive to focus on those that are lower on the pay scale to make sure that this is a way we can give back rather than, the reduction in the, rate, right? That we had that you had suggested earlier. This is a way that we realistically can give back in the community in a way that is going to be an impact. It's not to all residents, it's to a subset of residents, but this is a real way that we can do some good in the community in this way. So, but
Just so you know, Chris, I'm not arguing against the incentives for the rank and file staff at all.
Okay, I didn't say you were. I was just looking that way because of the pools thing, so I continue to look that way.
So I'd like to jump in and I'll get to you, Keith.
Sure.
So I think there's sort of two problems or two approaches. This I see as sort of a tactical approach. I mean, it's a one-time thing, but I think there's also a strategic question that we have to ask ourselves, and that's, I mean, if we have long-term staffing issues, does that mean that there's does that mean we need to take another strategy when it comes to looking at compensation? And one of the things, going back to the discussion on the 990, we actually haven't had a compensation review by an outside firm in over 10 years. So
That's not true.
Right.
I mean, a full top-down, I mean, because when we're talking here, we're talking the entire organization.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to make sure that we're clear when we're communicating to everyone that what you said before wasn't true.
Yeah, I'm talking about a full top-down.
Yeah.
I guess I agree. Wasn't quite clear, but a full top-down, president to lifeguard plan, because this is trying to retain staff up and down the entire organizational structure. So I think one of the things we need to look at is, is our compensation packages competitive up and down the line? And if it isn't, or if we're out of line in places, where is it out of line? And I think being able to get that information, get that data is essential. And I think we need to do it more often so we can make sure that our compensation is competitive and it's in line with the market. So now I'll get back to Keith and then I'll go to Sky.
So I agree with you wholeheartedly. One of the things that I heard in some of the conversations that we had over time is that when it comes to making the hard decisions, right, the board has to step up and support the hard decisions, because you spoke about maintaining pools, maintaining all of these pieces, but to have that next conversation of, okay, do we need to stagger or do we need to close, or for us to sit down and say, we want them all open, we have to, in open forum, we have to have that hard conversation and as a board support the staff on their recommendations, because if they've tried plan A, plan B, plan C, and we're still not getting what we need, then we have to support whatever that next thing is, and it may be a hard decision to make, but I think we at least have to have that conversation. So I believe that we can look at compensation and try to pay people more, so on and so forth, and I'm sure that they'd all be thrilled about that, right? But I think we have to take a look at some of the things that we've heard tonight. If we have too many buildings, if we have too many, other resources and things, we have to have that conversation. And yes, it's going to be uncomfortable to go back to villages and boards and talk about some of these things, but at some point we have to do it. And I think that's what needs to happen before we start talking about adjusting compensation to incent, keeping people around, or part of the conversation. Reg?
So really what we're talking about is the strategic plan.
Yep.
Because we have to have a conversation. You keep talking about a conversation. The conversation is the strategic plan, which spells out how we're going to, how we're going to run the company, how we're going to go, for the, foreseeable future. And those conversations have to be had, like we keep saying. We got to talk about, if we can't man the pools, we can't get all the personnel in the pools, why can't we? If we can't keep people coming, working for us, why can't we? What do we need to do? And that's a strategic level conversation that needs to be had. But in the meantime, I'll just say this, but in the meantime, we should do something for our staff and for our people that ensures that they know that we appreciate them. Then we work towards, the strategic plan so that we can make that a permanent thing, so we know what we're going to do and how we're going to do it.
Yeah, the board is strategic and the staff is tactical. Evolution is very slow. I think what happened last year was an outlier, and it may be the sign of the future. I think we have to expect it more. I think we have to brainstorm more solutions. And one of them is I'm all in favor of the retention incentives. Only one year did I ever work for a company that gave out bonuses, so it's something foreign to me. But with colleges starting early, I came from the West where colleges start at the end of September. So this is something that's really foreign to me, but I think we have to expect it. And I'm all for the retention incentives. But we also have to continue doing things besides monetary as far as rewards or bonuses go. To some people, an extra bonus is, a one-time only thing, and they put it in the bank and they forget about it. But if we could send that person to a 2-week class in something that they really want to get retrained in, that might be worth more than $2,500 in bonuses to them. Or give them a week off with their family. That might give them more of an incentive than monetary.
Hi, Keith.
And I apologize. I feel like I'm being annoying, but the types of things that we're discussing there are not board level things. Like how we're going to choose to incent staff is not a conversation that we need to have here. On this level is what I'm talking about, whether it's training or not. And the only reason I'm saying it is because I want to continue to reinforce, again, just my opinion. So if everybody else feels otherwise, you can just tell me to pipe down and we can move in a different direction. But I just want to make sure that we stay away from those operational pieces. And I'm going to address a rumor that's not out there yet, but I'm sure it's going to start as soon as this conversation is over. And the rumor is going to say that Keith wants to close pools and shut down tot lots. Just for the record, right, exactly. But just for the record, that's not the conversation. But I do think what I want to say is that that's the type of conversation that we need to have, not getting down into these incentives, but more, what are the hard things that need to occur so that we can move CA forward into the future? That's the bottom line. Whether we offer training and I'm just picking on yours specifically, but if we offer training or $2,500, that's not a discussion that's really for this table. Unless, again, 10 of us decide that that's what we want to do, and we should vote on that because I think there's some people who may opt out if that's really the direction that we want the board to move in.
French?
No.
Oh, sorry, I thought you had your hand up. I know we've been talking about tactics versus strategy, and sometimes I feel like when we talk about tactics as a board, and it's because we lack the strategy.
Yeah.
It's because the strategy isn't in place. So I think I think when we talk about strategy, the two things that come to mind are policy, and what is our compensation policy? Do we need to look at it again as a board to look at this from a strategic level? And then the second part is what should that policy include? What level of board involvement should be in that policy? How does that policy dictate when we do compensation studies and how they're done? What kind of information does the board need? These are just thoughts, but
I hear you. So I just want to say again, for me, it would be fantastic if we had a really good strategic plan. And then I'd love to get into the details of whether the board should control the compensation and all of these other pieces. But it's really funny to me that we can sit here and have all of these conversations and try to hold the staff accountable when we're not holding ourselves accountable. The question back to the resident, to me, is like, as a board member, I didn't hold staff accountable for keeping the pools open and for coming to me with solutions. And I intend to have that conversation, and I'm going to bring that up. But I think that's the feedback to them, is that as a board, the board didn't do its job to hold the staff accountable. The board is focusing on compensation and bonuses and all these other pieces, as opposed to having the accountability conversation and strategic accountability conversation around how we keep the pools open. And until that point, until that time, I'm gonna like rebut every one of these things that we come up with, because yes, I agree. I'm a policy guy, I'm a governance guy, but until we do our job, and our job starts at strategy and making the hard decisions, we can't continue to go down these other paths. We're wasting time, essentially, is what we're doing.
I guess the question I have is, when we talk about accountability, and we talk about accountability for not keeping all the pools open, how does that not deviate or descend into a tactical discussion about keeping pool XYZ open?
Sure. So I'll give you, for instance, that's on my mind relative to strategic planning conversation. I've heard from staff a number of times that we have a lot of assets on the books, and that we are struggling to keep the pools open because of the number of pools that are out there. And they've also talked about tot lots and the fact that we would like to rethink how tot lots are happening. So from a board, I'm going to say, look, here's my expectations. I want these things to occur. Tell me how to make that happen. And then the staff should come back to us and tell us how they're going to make that happen. And then we debate back and forth and go from that standpoint. But until we have those conversations, and that's literally something that I plan to bring up when we talk strategy, and hopefully it'll just end up magically in the strategic plan. But until we have those conversations, we have no business doing much else, right? And I even think about this, all these watershed conversations that we're having, we have to have that in the strategic plan to address the way that we want to move forward with watershed. No offense, but I'm listening to all of the presentations and things from the residents, and the bottom line is we are not being responsive because we are not having a strategic conversation about how we're going to manage open space and watershed. And we want to deal with all these little issues, but it's our fault. It's our fault because we're not talking strategy, and we're not doing the things that we need to do. So.
Any further comments on this? So does this need a motion? I mean, this is a discussion. Does this need a motion for a future meeting?
Discussion.
What? We're in discussion right now.
I don't think so. It's an operating decision.
I know, we're in discussion right now. I'm just saying, does this need a motion in a future meeting?
No.
No. Okay. Any further discussion on topic 8C? Seeing no, we'll move on to topic 8D. So this is the question of committees. What?
It sounded like B, but it's really D.
Is D. And Sky, do you want to talk about committees? Karen.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the residents, I made notes when the residents were talking, they brought up a lot of the concerns I have around the charters. So the thing that I wanted to talk about is the majority of the committees were staff committees, and the charters have been, staff changed the charters. The committees were not informed that the charters were being changed. And I think there's a problem with the charters themselves. And I think if it was already a staff committee and there was a charter for that staff committee, that we should have followed the change process on those charters before we introduced anything new. So I have a problem with the committees that were already existing staff committees. I think we need to go back. I would really like to see us go back, follow the process, and get some buy-in. I think the Aging Well Committee did a really good job. They put a group of people together to make some recommendations on what the charter should be, and I think they're working through that, and I was really glad to see that. So that charter is under discussion for them, so that makes sense to me. But I have huge concerns about the fact that the charters ignore the villages. So if the villages say, if Kingston Tribe says, I want Keith to be on the Watershed Advisory Committee, the members of that committee can already, can just go ahead and say, no, we don't like Keith.
Yeah.
He smells funny. We don't like him. I mean, they just arbitrarily can vote against him. And I don't like that. I don't like that the villages are being ignored. And I don't like that insular nature of the committees. And I'm also not convinced that the Homeowners Association Act doesn't still apply to these staff committees, because I don't think that we can pick and choose when the HOA Act applies and when it doesn't. So I feel like these staff committees still, we talked about this, the transparency, the meetings need to be published somewhere, the minutes need to be available. If we're videoing it, a video needs to be made available, and it needs to be done timely. Someone shouldn't have to request that stuff. So those are my comments about the charters. I wanted to make sure we had that discussion out in the open.
Okay.
I think Dennis explained it very succinctly at the last meeting, and perhaps you could do it again. I know, Karen, that a lot of things that you said were not reality for a lot of the committees. There are some committees that do not have village representation. They are completely staffed by at-large members. I know 2 or 3 of the committees are rewriting the charter, and some committees have just accepted the charter as it was given to them. And they are staff committees. The decision was made at the end of Janet Evans' term for transferring 8 of the committees, and that basically never happened because at the beginning of our term, we were assigned to committees and we received annual reports from these 8 committees that no longer operated under that. I blame myself as well as the rest of the board for not asking the questions that needed to be asked when we voted on the final 3 committees. I didn't have the broad experience to ask about the charters and what are the disadvantages of transferring the committees to the staff. I firmly believe, and the people I've talked to believe, that the committees should advise the staff. They were never used appropriately for being board committees, so I think they belong at the staff side.
So if I could, I would say it's mostly a philosophical discussion because you have to decide as a board if you want to have the committees report to you, and then they have to follow the HOA Act. And you cannot pick and choose. But the HOA Act does define what falls under that act, and staff committees do not fall under that act. Does not mean that we don't want them to be transparent, we don't want to have minutes, but it's not as rigid a process. And could the charters be adjusted and made better? Absolutely. But philosophically, if you want them to be board committees, that's a bigger lift for staff, and we'd have to and there's a rigid set of guidelines, and there's no margin for error if they are board committees. They have to follow that act rigidly.
Keith, Alan, then Karen. So
Well,
Keith,
can I respond to Dennis real quick?
What? Alan had his hand up. Okay, I'll go Alan and Keith. Karen, if that's okay.
Karen wanted to respond.
So do you have a quick
Conversation
response?
continues.
Okay, so I'm working on a question to John, and I just haven't finished doing all my research yet. But is the Columbia Association an entity of the board?
The board is the Columbia Association. We are the only members.
So Columbia Association, we're deciding on the budget here. We decide on the strategic plan, everything that has to do with for staff. So how do we separate? It just seems to me that CA, the Columbia Association, is an entity of the board. We decide the budget, we decide the strategic plan. How is it that staff is not subject to the HOA?
Well, because under your definition, every meeting that I have in my office, or Susan has, or Dennis has, would be subject to the HOA. Can't conceive of it. Like, everything would be open.
But do you think that the intent of the law was to have secret meetings with staff, for residents to be involved in committees, and then to have meetings where you don't have to make them public? If it doesn't follow under the HOA Act, you're going to have these meetings with residents. You're not going to make them public. You don't have to publish meeting minutes. Any of that stuff, none of that stuff would apply to these committees. Do you think that is the spirit of the HOA Act?
First of all, the HOA Act, Columbia Association, we do not fit neatly into the HOA Act. And I know there have been attempts through the years to separate. The Columbia Association is not a typical homeowners association. It's far from it. It does a lot more than some condo association with 50 residents. I mean, not everything fits well. But I don't know where the secretive and I really have no idea where that comes from. There's no intent in the charter that I've seen in the revised charter to be secretive. In fact, it's the opposite. It says it will be open. It says the minutes will be taken. It says agendas will be posted. I mean, the revised charters, and again, they can be changed, but they were changed in an effort to shift away from board control pursuant to the direction that the board gave and the HOA Act and the guidance provided by the Attorney General. That was the sole purpose of changing the charter, because if the board controls who is on the committee, what their task is, what the rules are, it's a board committee. And you may want to do that, that's fine, but then it's up to you. So, problem in the Aging Well Committee, that's your problem now. Because quite honestly, the people on these committees weren't listening to the staff. Because the attitude was, we don't have to listen to you, it's the board. All we tried to do was address that. And I think the charter's call for openness, I realize that it's not, you don't have control. If you want control, you have it, but you have to take it all. So when there's a problem, I would say this. By shifting it back to the board, you're going to increase the likelihood you're going to have legal issues down the road with the Attorney General. So if you want that, that's fine. But when somebody complains, you're not following Robert's Rules of Order, because that's what the board does, they can go and seek legal redress. I don't think under staff committees that can be the case. If you want to do that, you're the board, that's fine, you do it. But I will tell you, the feedback we got was that these committees weren't functioning the way they were supposed to. There were disagreements, there were problems with civility, villages weren't appointing people, and all the rewrite attempted to do was to address that and at the same time remove the board control and make the committees function better. It would be illogical if the staff wants to have these committees and not report to the board and not be secret. Why would the staff want to displease the board, want to act contrary to them? It makes no sense, okay? I heard something earlier about, well, we can't get records. I don't know what act of the what you're reading, the HOA Act. I don't think changing the charters makes any difference to a person requesting records. It doesn't. I mean, look at the act. I've heard lots of, this great philosophy about what happens with the HOA Act. I have nobody point me to something in the law that says, what they claim is correct, because it's not. It doesn't affect whether you can request records or not. The change makes no difference at all. So, it's your choice what you want to do. If you want to take them back, the staff is fine. All we're trying to do is address the problem, and we're trying to make this function better. But if you disagree and you want to take them back, have at it. The staff will be happy to take. It's in your lap. We'll try to help. Staff will try to help as much as you can. But I think you're going to have to deal with the consequences if you do.
So I just want to clarify Karen's question. And you basically said if you walk into Dennis's office, that should be subject to an HOA committee, and both you and Dennis aren't a committee. I mean, you're both staff. Neither of you are members of the organization, and the fact that you talk to each other and.
So how's the staff committee different?
The question I have is when we actually get residents together and we call it a committee, whether it reports directly to staff or reports directly to the board, is there actually a difference? I mean, that's I think the question is.
There is a difference under what the definition from the Attorney General provided, which basically says that if the board gives direction to the committee, then it's a board committee. It's an arm of the board. So if you're controlling, if you're giving the residents your direction to do something, it's part of you, and that way it's subject to the specific provisions of board meetings under the HOA Act.
So the question I have is, if we, the board, give direction to Dennis, who gives direction to a staff member who's running the committee, doesn't that create the same problem? Because if we, the board, give direction to Dennis, and if Dennis gives direction to the staff member in charge of the committee, aren't we indirectly still?
You're giving direction, but I don't understand, like, this is in the charters. I mean, you have, under the CA charters and bylaws, you control the CEO, and then the CEO runs the organization. So, if you're saying that, well, we're going to go through the back door and tell Dennis to do something, and it doesn't look like we're controlling it, but he is, then then he's providing your rules going through him indirectly. To me, okay, you've made the rules, it's your committee, but I haven't seen any indication that you're directing Dennis to make specific rules for a committee to bring something back. Again, it's your choice. I mean, you could, if you want to do that, that's fine. I sat through August, September. The clear intent I got is, well, we want to separate ourselves from this because of the problems that were caused and the strict requirements of the HOA Act. And that's all we attempted to do. But if you want to take it back, take it back. That's fine.
So I do apologize, I forget the exact order of the cue, but I think it's Alan, then Keith, then Reg. So Alan?
Yeah, I think John's been very clear about where that line is, that, the minute we tell Dennis, make sure that the aquatics committee does X, we've now made it our committee, not staff's committee. But just the mere fact that we supervise, if you will, Dennis, doesn't mean that we're supervising the aquatics committee. But I will say that for me, at the higher level, there really is a question about who's getting the advice, who ought to get the advice of these advisory committees, and what advice is wanted or needed. Couple that with sort of who speaks for the community, if you will. Does the board speak for the community? Do these different resident committees speak for the community? Maybe all of the above. But I think I was one, for me, it was never about getting away from the strictures of the HOA Act. It was about where the usefulness of the advice goes. And I've always been one who felt that they ought to be board advisory committees because I want the advice. I want the input from the community as a board member. I voted, I think, I'd have to look at the tape, in favor of the change for either because it was obvious that that's where the board was going, and this is the second change because I wasn't on the board during the first change. Or my recollection is, my understanding was that these committees were going to follow the same strictures. It didn't matter that they were to the staff committees or board committees, but they were going to follow the same guidelines. So I'm feeling either I misunderstood or feeling a little bit of a bait and switch there. The other question that I would have for the staff, though, is, has the staff looked at what advice you really want and need? Or have you just kept the same committees because that's the committees that we had? Or is there any thought at the staff level of thinking about where does the staff want advice from the community. The other piece I will say that I'm most concerned about, is the self-perpetuating nature of these committees, that they are, from what I read, at least of the Watershed Advisory Committee, that's the only one I really looked at semi-carefully, is that the members of the committee choose their replacements. And to me, that's a recipe for insularness, not a recipe for expansion and getting as broad and diverse a representation and advice.
Keith and Reg. So I feel like I've been expanding. I started with 2, then maybe three different paths, but all of the comments that are being provided, I don't disagree necessarily about the potential of insular nature or if there's charters that need to change, so on and so forth. But I think just like any other process that we have for the staff, we should submit those pieces and say, hey, you know what, we're hearing from the residents that these are the concerns. We think you should go ahead and take a look at that. And then they have a responsibility, they being the staff have a responsibility to go back and take a look at it and make changes. You know, what John was saying is, can I call you John? Is that fine?
It's his name.
Okay. What John was saying is that, that messed me up. I couldn't say what John was saying. I'll leave that one alone. But bottom line is, I think we can all submit. There's a different line. We can all submit feedback. You know, just like we can on any other issue, and the staff can take it into consideration. Oh, the staff doesn't want to irritate the board. At least it shouldn't be that the staff wants to irritate the board. So the hope is that the feedback that's being provided from the residents regarding King's Contrivance and our representative that you brought up as an example, something along those lines would be taken into consideration, and a change may occur. The board versus staff committee piece, I think we need to separate that. Chris was talking about separating the pools and the piece, the bonuses or the incentives before. I think we need to separate our comments about how we want to see the committees improve from this board versus staff committee. They're very different conversations, and if we're going to disagree with council, then we just need to go ahead and have a separate meeting where we invite folks together, and we have to just make a decision about, you know, do we agree, do we not agree, and do we want to take the risk, you know, based upon what council has said. We can take on that risk. This isn't a hard and fast rule. We can take whatever risk we want. So I think that's a separate conversation that needs to occur. And the last piece I've been thinking about for a while now, especially when we've heard commentary about the Watershed Advisory, is these are advisory or opportunities for the staff to provide, for the residents to provide input. We're trying to get people to be able to participate in this process. And I think that's really valuable. But what I want to be careful of, and we keep dipping into this area, I would want and expect that if staff needs a professional opinion, that we're going to go out and we're going to pay for a professional opinion to assess whatever is going on, and we're going to get the opinion from the residents in terms of, hey, what do you like, what do you not like, what do you think is appropriate, and we're going to combine all of that, you know, staff input, staff recommendation with the professional paid consultants that we're getting and the residents' opinion, and that's what's going to come to the board for a final decision. But I believe that we need to be careful that we don't slide these committees into all of a sudden they're decision-making bodies who are providing professional advice to the staff and or board. That's not what I don't believe that that's what they were ever designed to do. And I think we're fooling ourselves if we're going to be able to solicit and get the right people on all of these committees to hold it as a trusted consultant source. I personally would want to allocate some dollars, go find the consultant who's going to assess this thing in a reasonable fashion, combine that with residents, and then come with a recommendation. And that's what I've wanted on the watershed for a while now, and I've just been waiting for the strategic conversation that we'll have. And I think that's how we have to move forward with all of these pieces so that we don't get ourselves buried into, well, the people on this committee are not qualified to do. No, they're not qualified. They're residents. What they're qualified for is to be residents and to provide their feedback on the committee as to what their opinion is from whatever their perspective is. It's not a matter of qualifications. If we want the qualifications, we need to go hire professionals. Reg?
So I've got a couple things just want to talk about. So give me a moment here. But the first one is an army that goes in divided is an army that's going to be defeated very easily. And so one of the things that I've seen since I've been on the board, and when I first came on the board, now back on the board again, what I've been seeing is we spend an awful lot of time not saying it, but you can see the tension. It's staff versus board versus staff. We constantly are fighting each other and not working together at all. We have these little classes on a Saturday where we have kumbaya and, we sit down and we talk about how we're all going to get together. But that's what baloney, because we're not. And we need to get over that. We need to come together, staff and board, and work as a team. Now, John was actually talking about that in a way, but he was trying to get our attention that, hey, we need to pay attention. And if you want to do this, these are the results. We need to think about that. We need to stop fighting. The board and the staff need to stop fighting each other, start coming together as a team, because we have an overall bigger picture to deal with, and that is we've got a Columbia Association. We've got residents out there that are looking for us to come up with the right ideas, the right decisions, and be the kind of association that they're investing their money in. They came here investing in this community because they've heard what this community is about and they want a part of it. But they don't want, a group of people that are constantly fighting each other. So that part we need to get a hold of. We need to actually stop. The other things that I wanted to say was that I want to correct one thing. That when we talked about the Aging Well community, I was there in the meeting that brought this all to a head. Not a single one of you were there. Karen, you weren't there. Keith, you weren't there. Nobody was there. I was there, along with Leslie from the CA staff. And let me tell you what, there was one person who took that meeting and destroyed that meeting and destroyed everything that was being done there. And as I said,
just do not mention names.
I'm not going to mention any names. I'm smarter than that.
Yeah, I just want to.
Okay, let me finish. I'm just going to say that person. I told Dennis and I told several others, said, don't reward people for bad behavior, and that's what we've done. So we've got a committee of people that were doing exactly what they were supposed to be doing, and they've been taken across the coals, and everybody assumes that everything they did that day was wrong. It was not. I was there. I witnessed it. And I think it was wrong of us to turn around and say, hey, that group of people were absolutely at fault. They were not. That was one person that did that. And everybody gravitated to saying, okay, we got to change everything. But I'm going to go back to what I was saying, and that we really have to get our act together as a body. That's staff and the board. Start acting like we are the adults we're supposed to be, period.
So I wanted to key off of something Alan mentioned. Because you said one of the things we have to ask is, are these the right committees? I mean, I'm not sure how old these committees are, but I'm guessing they were established several strategic plans ago. So one thing we might want to do is, when we look at the strategic plan that we're creating, can we start aligning these committees to the strategic plan? Because if we got committees that aren't aligned to the strategic plan, does that committee still make sense? If we got items in the strategic plan that are missing a committee, is that an opportunity to establish a new committee? So I think that's one of the things we might look at. Do we have the right committees, and are they aligned to the next strategic plan, which is obviously not written yet? The other concern I have is, everything in the one advice that I've gotten from every single lawyer is, no matter what you do, someone can complain. I think that's sort of a universal rule. If you want to refute that, you can. But someone can always complain. And so it really comes down to risk, in my opinion. And the risk I see here is, when we look at the old charters, we look at Article 5. This just happens to be the old watershed advisory charter, but I think most of the old charters were similar. Can I get through this?
Yeah. Just want to.
And Article 5 talks about amendments and how the charter should be amended. And basically, it says, the committee may vote at any regular special meeting to recommend to the CA board amendments to this charter. This assumes that the board needs to accept changes based on what we currently have. And so I think if we're changing the charters, I think to at least comply with the spirit of the old charter, that's something that we should be doing. Then I'll get back to Alan and Reg, if that's okay.
I think, Eric, you've used the wrong "we" a couple of times. If we change the charters, then there are committees. So if we decide what committees need to be, then there are committees. My point was, has the staff thought about it? And I just wanted to raise that because I could easily see myself not thinking about that. Oh, these are the committees. Okay, now let's get busy and give them new charters and move on. But there is an underlying question whether the staff needs those committees or do they need other ones. Reg, I agree with you. We need to act like adults, and we have different roles. And there is a natural tension, and by tension it doesn't have to be negative, but there's a natural tension built into a board-staff relationship that we don't want to get too chummy and just rubber stamp everything the staff does, and we don't want to be enemies of the staff. So there's a natural tension there. What we want, there's a great definition of psychological safety, and one of the elements of it is you need to have high intellectual friction with low social friction. So we want to have high intellectual friction with the staff and bump our ideas up against theirs and think about them without we're the enemies of each other kind of thing. And my last point, and Keith's not here, but I guess I would say, and I'm just using the WAC as an example, but I'm using it partly just simply as an example, partly because it is one of the few committees, I believe, where expertise was part of the deal. The Aquatics Committee is anybody who's interested, come join the Aquatics Advisory Committee. I don't know about some of the other ones. But the WAC really was supposed to have some degree of knowledge. So if we're going to say that, and I would agree with Keith, that they're not the professionals, they're not the consultants, then I think we just need to never cite the WAC. I wouldn't want to hear from the staff that, oh, hey, the WAC agreed to this, therefore we're going to do it. Any more than I'd want to hear from the staff that I'm just making this up, Joe, the groundskeeper, thinks we should do whatever, and cite that as the reason why we're doing something. Yes, we want to get ideas from, but this is at whatever appropriate level of the staff, that's where the decision came from.
Reg?
So the other part that I had forgotten with my speech there was that one thing that it's really irked everyone was that we were never told that there was going to be a charter, that it was going to be redrafted, redone. That information never made it to the board, so the board found out about it through
Residents,
emails, telephone calls, and that was the part that really made a number of members of the board upset because we weren't told. We had no clue. We had no knowledge of it. And the last part is, yeah, you're right. That there is always that bit of peace between staff and board. It's like with, as an Army officer, I've got soldiers that I deal with. I have non-commissioned officers that I deal with. There's always that little bit of friction. But when you're working together and you can work as a team to accomplish a mission, you don't have to hate each other.
Absolutely.
That's what I'm trying to say.
So I got a odd question. Because this. Okay.
Was that a response?
I was actually going to respond to Alan.
Good, yeah.
But Alan, you mentioned that the second we do anything with the charter, we're now getting our nose back into it, and it becomes a board committee. So I feel like no matter what we do with the charter, if we're got our nose into it, it becomes a board committee again.
They don't have anything to do with the charter. They're staff committee.
No, but but at some point, we voted to make them staff committees. The question I have is, can an HOA committee be turned into a staff committee legally, or do we actually have to go through a process of disbanding the committees and reformulating them? Because I feel like by just sort of changing them overnight, people are surprised. Whereas if you actually took a formal process and formally voted to disband, if that's what we wanted to do, and the staff want to create their own committees, they could create their own committees. That would at least add more transparency. It would also basically put a sort of a final board imprint on the committees. Like, okay, we voted to disband them. No one can complain their board committees anymore because they're gone. Otherwise, because of the way we did it now through a transfer process, there's still that history. I mean, in fact, even if you go through the charters.
Just the point of, I think that we're stepping into closed meeting pieces because we receive legal advice and we would have to go back and get legal advice if we were going to discuss the structure of the committee. So I personally feel uncomfortable discussing all of these pieces about the committees unless we go back in the closed session.
How is, how is that closed session?
Because we continue to, and sorry, Chris, we continue to go back and ask John to clarify, and we're trying to wiggle our way into understanding, did the committees come over properly? Did this happen? Did that happen? And we got legal advice on all of these pieces. So I'd prefer, if we're going to really dig deep, that we go back into closed session to talk about all of the different angles that we want to talk about, as opposed to trying to be legal scholars here and find a way to make this the way that we want it to be. I apologize.
Chris?
So, I mean, boiling it down real quick right now, those committees were voted to be staff committees. Right now, there are no board committees, right? The advisory committees report to the staff, and then staff makes recommendations to the board based on what is found by those advisory committees. That's how it works. The board right now has nothing to do with it. So we're talking a lot about things that don't matter unless we want to take those committees back, which I don't think anybody does, right? So I think the question now is do we want to take the committees back, right, and discuss that? And I think that there's a whole line of discussion that we don't want to do tonight because it's 10:15. Or do we want to allow staff to run them as we voted on and make more clear to residents that have disagreements with the way things are being run, what the path of recourse is to have their voices heard in a way that is actually functional because the board has nothing to do with it any longer.
Okay.
Did I say anything wrong there?
Yeah, I just want to get clarification on something that you said, Chris, because I don't think the committees no longer report to the board, so they don't know. They're not going to give anything to staff for staff to come to us with. They don't need to. That's
Well, I mean, they're advisory committees.
to the staff.
Yeah,
Not to the
mission of the Columbia Watershed Resident Advisory Committee is to advise the Columbia Association on matters directly related to CA's watershed plan and to work with the CA and the village community associations to enhance public awareness of and facilitate education on watershed issues.
Right, but nothing to do with the board.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
It's to the staff, right? And then the staff would take that into consideration when making recommendations to the board.
But
That's the path, supposedly.
but it says advise the Columbia Association. The board is the Columbia Association.
The board of directors oversees the Columbia Association, but the board of
We're the members of the, we're the members of the, we're the members of the Columbia Association.
Regardless, they do not report to the board.
Right.
It is a staff entity. We're talking a lot about woulda, coulda, shouldas, water under the bridge. Unless we want to go forward and make a decision that we're going to take those committees back, this doesn't mean anything, folks.
Andy, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think Chris, has made the point. We gave these committees over to staff. We abolished all of the board advisory committees, and they are now advisory committees to the Columbia Association, to staff. We turned them all over. I think we had some good reasons for it, because I think staff gets a lot more use and information from them than the board ever did. So we made that decision. So I'm getting back to what Keith said. One of the problems is, we don't necessarily give staff, guidance. And we told staff, here they are, your committees. And what are we doing? We are now spending almost an hour discussing staff's problems, not our problems, because we gave them over to staff. Instead of discussing, some of the strategic issues. And so, I agree with Chris. We turn them over to staff. There's staff advisory committees. If somebody on the board wants to try to reverse that, yeah, okay. But, we already voted. And we have to honor our vote. Unless we change it, that's what we decided. We turn them over to staff.
Keith. So to take it to kind of pivot a little bit, I think, to a positive and moving it forward, because there's, like I said, there's the committee, whether we want it to be board, staff, so on and so forth. But the two things that I really heard is that there's feedback from the residents about the structure and the nature and what's happening at those committees that we don't feel or we're hearing is not appropriate. And we have communicated that, or we will communicate that to staff so that they can take that into account as they develop charters with the committees. And I think that that's an important piece there, because what we're missing with all of this debate about committee structure and so on and so forth is that the residents told us something about the way that the committees are performing, and we have to provide that feedback to the staff to change and to make adjustments based upon what the residents are saying. Not because the board said it, but because we're relaying information. That's it. The other piece, right, and then the other piece that I think, Reg, you brought up, which is, I think the other important piece in all of these conversations, is that the communication didn't happen to the board, okay? Now, there's two pieces to this. Operationally, they're not required to provide any communication to the board. But from a courtesy standpoint, because we're working together as a team, it might have been beneficial to have a conversation with the board and say, hey, just giving you a heads up, this may come your way. And I think that that's an opportunity that we can discuss, or not discuss further, but at least it's acknowledged that was potentially a miss. And that's the teamwork and relationship that we're trying to build. Not required, but hey, a heads up might have been nice so that we're not getting bombarded with resident comments and so on and so forth. So those are really the only two things, in my opinion, that we should be discussing. Is there any other feedback from residents that needs to be heard? And we've identified that we can do a better job with communication. That's it. That's it. Unless we're going to take it into closed session so that we can debate the HOA Act and get advice and all of those other pieces, which I don't really want to do that right now. But if we need to do that, let's just make that active decision rather than trying to debate it right now.
Sky, then Karen. Sky.
Yeah, you took some of the words out of my mouth. The decision has been made. This has been probably my most disappointing situation in the last 8 months. And it was a lack of communication. I don't know, and I'm feeling, okay, we blew it. The staff blew it. We did not communicate with the committees, with the committee members, with the committee chairs. And the we was Caroline and maybe Dennis as well as us. And I want to just admit it and say, okay, I want to do better in the future, and let's move on, but let's document this and try and, when we have a vote on anything, brainstorm, what happens if this passes? What happens if it doesn't pass? What are the ramifications? Let's be skeptical of everything and try and think of as many questions as we can so that we're not blindsided in the future by a decision that may not have been the best. And again, I blame myself for not thinking of some of the questions like, what are the ramifications of transferring the committees over to staff? And, now I can think of questions I should have asked and didn't, but I just want to move on and strive to do better in the future.
Keith, or Karen?
Yeah, I think Sky said some of what I was going to say, but I would be fine if staff will take what the residents have said tonight at Residents Speak Out and the other comments that we've received, if they would take that back and there would be some resolution that they would come back and tell us, okay, we've amended the charters. So for example, I'm very concerned that I think it's the WAC charter says something about a non-disclosure agreement. Are we having closed meetings with these committees where we're sharing confidential information? That seems kind of like that shouldn't be happening. Maybe I'm wrong. So I would like to see certain things come out. I can't direct that because then it would be a board decision, but I would like to hear some resolution from staff that they've gone back to these committees and they've worked with residents and residents are satisfied that their concerns have been heard and addressed.
Ellen?
Yeah. Sky, I'm glad you brought the word skeptical in. I've tried for 10 years to be a professional skeptic on this board, and sometimes that's accepted well, and sometimes it's seen as gumming up the works or being anti-staff or whatever, but it really, the intention has always been exactly what you said, and I've got plenty of regrets about questions I didn't ask for the same reasons you mentioned. I think, Keith, something you pointed out, and I think for me it's one of those tensions. It's not something we're going to resolve, but there is an aspect where these public meetings that we have are our opportunity to speak for the public and to have the public hear us. Whereas if we type something into a spreadsheet,
sure,
that's a little one-on-one thing. Some of us may not even read it, the question, much less the answer.
Yeah.
The public doesn't know that so I think there's a little bit of both. So I don't think it's true, and I'm not saying you're saying this, but I want to just state this, that it's always true that anything we hear from the residents, we ought to just put into the smart sheet system. I think we need to recognize that part of our role is, we have residents speak out, but also part of our role is to speak for the collective views that we get from residents. And we just need to allow for some of that. So that's, again, just, there's no bright line way to, stop here, start there, but it's something we need to always be able to do, I think.
Any further comments?
So we absolutely want to hear what residents have to say, but let's say we're not going to agree with every resident.
Sure.
Some residents want me to feed the deer, some want me to kill the deer, and there are going to be disagreements about how the committees are run and who's on the committees, and so we'll listen to what everyone has to say, but we're not going to resolve every single issue that every single resident has about every single committee. That's not going to happen, but we will absolutely listen and try to make the best decision that we can.
There's a simple solution to that problem.
What's that?
You feed the deer with the deer you just killed. That's a simple solution to that problem.
Are we still on mic?
It depends. Are deer carnivore?
Motion to close.
So I'd like to. I'd like to, Karen, quickly.
I just want to know, so I made a request, I hope the rest of the board agrees with it, it sounded like that's what Sky wanted, is if staff will come back to us in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, that they've resolved these issues that the residents have.
Okay, that's what he said, not resolved, but that they've addressed them in some
Resolution doesn't necessarily mean the resident was happy.
And then we can look at it as a board.
But some of the committees meet quarterly only.
It won't be 2 weeks.
Anyway, I'd like to, if it's okay, I'd like to wrap this segment up, but before doing so, I'd like to just key on something Reg said.
Get my lawyer.
Well, if
Sitting over there.
he's over there, and something he said was, I think, really important. Like a divided army can't win. I mean, you can't win, and I think I've heard that at work from other people that are also military. It seems to be a common theme in the military. And from my experience, the thing that causes division is a breakdown in communication. And I think with the committees, we've had an obvious breakdown in communication. I think that's something that we as a board, we as an organization, need to do a better job at. We need to facilitate communication. We need to do better at communicating with each other, communicating with our residents, so that when we do take a vote such as this, we understand what the ramifications are, and when the charters change, it's not a surprise. So I think opening those lines of communication and fostering them is key.
I'll be really quick. I heard the skeptical term, and I understand the skeptical term, but I think also what goes in line with that is trust. And part of the reason why staff may not bring things to the board is because there's a trust that that information is going to be handled in a reasonable fashion. So I think there's some balance there in terms of communication. We also have to figure out how we establish some trust.
With that, I will, assuming there's no more comments, I would like to go to proposed new topics. Any proposed new topics? Sky?
Questions only?
Yeah, now that we're talking about the strategic
Questions only.
plan.
Only 9. Thought I was.
I'm sorry.
I thought I was going to end the meeting early. Sky, Warren reports, so questions only? You have a question?
Yeah. Now that the residents even are speaking about the strategic plan, a lot of people in my village are talking about what does CA mean to them? What should CA do? What is the value of CA? And I would like to put that on the agenda in the near future and maybe incorporate part of it into the strategic plan. Part of that falls under communication because we're doing an excellent job of marketing to the in crowd, the people that have already signed up for our emails, but the people who haven't, how do we reach them? How do we bring CA to the residents rather than asking the residents to come to CA for information? So.
And I agree, and I think that's an important thing for the strategic plan. Any other questions only? Alan?
I'll just renew my request to you, John, that it was really helpful in the past when we had some sense in these, about the bills, what CA's intended position was going to be, or thoughts on the matter were going to be, or so on.
I can tell you, I get it. I think right now, there was nothing we thought was necessary to recommend a specific position because of the timing and the nature of what is happening. I think there may come a time when we would do that, and we have no problem doing it. What I would say is if there's some bill that we pointed out that you have feelings or concerns about, that's what we want to hear. We'll hear it now or, otherwise. But there's nothing in the bills that we put up. We thought at this time we would have to say, let's take this position.
I hear that. To me, there's a prior step to that. And it sort of really goes along with what we were just talking about. I remember even since Milton was president, one of the things I remember saying, and the board saying to Milton was, if you even think the board might be interested, let us know, And there's never going to be perfect, nobody's going to be perfect on that. But, so we would like, I think, that, as I heard that instruction, I'll use we were saying to the staff, err on the side of over-communicating with the board, over-informing the board of potential. So when you say, so to me that applies to this thing like the advisory committee. I'm not saying, yes, to me that was an oversight. I agree with you, Sky, on both the board's and the staff's part. That was a miscommunication and oversight. We all could have done better. In this case as well, I depend, and I'm going to speak for me, I don't know what the other board members think, I depend on your legal aptitude and knowledge of CA and knowledge of the community and so on to anticipate some of those things and let us know, even if it's a small percentage, yes, this might become something you want to think about. I think you ought to, I'm going to point you to this one because it's, I read through all these and they start to blend together and I start to lose focus. And as I pointed out, I think I pointed out before, in the past, we've gotten often on the wrong side of the timeline where, yes, this is important, it's coming up. Oh, and by the way, the House is going to vote on it or the committee is going to vote on it next week. And now we're 2 weeks away from our next meeting. We don't have an opportunity to really take a reasoned position on it. So I'm depending on you to be more proactive than you might think you need to be in letting us know these things.
And any other questions? That brings us to proposed new topics. Any proposed new topics?
Oh, I thought I'm sorry.
Sorry, I actually skipped 9 accidentally, so I went back to 9.
Oh, okay.
So now we're on 10.
I'm not going to repeat what I said.
Andy, proposing topic.
Actually, I do have a topic I'd like to put on the agenda topics log for a future, not maybe within the next couple of months, but I attended the Gateway Master Plan kickoff meeting. Major, massive development that the county is going to do, and the county is committing to having the plan done in 1 year. And we are a major landholder in the Gateway. We own a chunk of the land, and any plan will definitely affect us. And so I'd like the topic on the Gateway Master Plan to be put on a future agenda and ensure the staff is following it, because it has major ramifications for us as a city, as a community, Long Reach, Owen Brown, how that area develops, how many people live there. They all pay the CA, assessment. So I just think we need to follow that topic in a greater detail because of the county's aggressive schedule that they intend to present the master plan for the county council to vote on in a year.
So what were, did you know ahead of time what the key decision points for the board might be regarding Gateway?
Not right now. I'm not going to talk about right now.
Okay, because that might affect
some
this.
things.
It might affect how we want to schedule
but
this.
I did see some CA reps there. So, CA staff was definitely following it, and I'm sure they're going to follow it even more closely.
Karen?
Yeah, so Andy, how much, in the entire development, how much is CA land?
Maybe 10 acres of open space. They're important pieces of open space because they're right in the center.
Right in the center.
It's not a huge amount of land, but it is really, it's like, will be as important to that development as like Symphony Woods is to Columbia. Because really right, it would be the central park in that little development.
So you're going to put a play area on that, Dennis?
And also, I guess it's also.
I'm just kidding. I just wanted to understand, like, when you were saying significant, they're lien payers, I was like, well, how much, what are we talking about here? Like, are we building a whole new village? I started to panic that we're gonna.
There's 1,000 acres.
Yeah, but we only own an acre.
We have more than that, but it's mostly bits and pieces. We do have one piece of commercial property in there that was given to us by Howard Hughes in exchange for some future draft pick or something.
So I guess the question is, how much do we own and how much are lien properties?
Isn't this a future topics?
Yeah.
It is, but Andy
Okay.
opened the Pandora's box.
Yeah, I know.
I just said put it on the agenda topics log.
I'll get to you.
Okay. Seems like it's more confusing than 5 minutes. Any other proposed new topics? So I do have one. I'll note that we actually had or have a compensation policy. This one is dated 2011. It seems a bit outdated, so I'd like to put on the new topics log the compensation policy for CI.
I have an alibi. I think some of our past miscommunications could have been alleviated early. I would like to consider something like monthly town meetings with a different topic, that maybe a panel of staff presenting the facts and people in the audience presenting their opinions, and this would fall under communication in the strategic plan.
Thanks. So we got Gateway, compensation policy, and town meetings.
Just a question on the compensation policy. Isn't there a policy review being conducted already?
Yes. Well,
It's just an enumeration.
It's enumeration.
It's not really and consolidation, not an evaluation of them.
It's basically
just trying to find
we're
them
basically trying to get them. and this is actually and it's sort of And the thing I appreciate is as he's finding stuff, we're getting them. So if you go in the drive, you'll see things populated as things get found. And this is one of the things that popped up. But yeah, it is from 2011. It's a bit out of date. I'm not sure it's executable based on the age of it. So I think it's something that we want to take a look at. With that brings us to chair remarks. I'll keep it short because we're slightly over. But yeah, I'd like to thank you all for coming. I'd like to thank everyone for a good discussion on both the budget and the strategic plan. And I look forward to discussing and debating the strategic plan next week. So thank you. With that, can I get a motion to adjourn?
I motion.
Okay, second. I got a motion by Karen, second by Keith to adjourn. Any objections? No objections, meeting adjourned. 10:40.
Thanks, Eric.
I don't.